Chapter 180. Drawing the snake out of its hole to stab Purple Eyebrows in the main hall, many graceful enchantresses were clapping their hands and dancing merrily. Purple Eyebrows' Taoist sat behind the table and watched for a while, but felt bored. He threw the wine cup down and waved his hand to drive them away. While he was bored, he heard a loud shout from outside, "Lu Junbai, get out, your Master Gua is here to settle the score with you." Then there were bursts of explosions from outside, followed by collapsing walls and houses, and wails and screams. Obviously, someone was wantonly destroying the halls on the island. Purple Eyebrows' Taoist's expression changed, and there was a hint of excitement in his eyes. When Xiao Han went out, he told him to guard Lu Mainyang carefully. Knowing that he was impatient, Xiao Han ordered Yen Rong to find many enchantresses for him to entertain, and told him that even if the world outside was turned upside down, he only needed to guard the cave residence and was not allowed to go out at will. Therefore, when he heard the noise, he was patient at first, but after waiting for a while, it seemed that it was getting more and more lively outside, and he couldn't help but feel itchy. He thought to himself, "I have the restriction talisman in hand, do I still need to be afraid of White Sky Demon King? Listening to the noise, this person will come to fight sooner or later. Why not go out and have a look?" With this thought in mind, he could no longer restrain himself. His body leaped up, and the smoke swirled, wrapping around him as he turned into a purple gas and flew out of the cave. He ascended to the clouds and hung in midair as he looked forward. He looked down from above, and naturally saw everything. On the island, birds were flying in panic, trees were falling, and houses were collapsing. Several magnificent temples that were originally repaired had become a terrible sight. A strong man was riding on a rock, controlling a green-scaled python that was about 100 feet long, which was made of black light, to rush back and forth, driving a group of small demons on the island to run around the mountain, laughing wildly from time to time. Zhang Yan chose Guolai to lure the enemy because he liked his temperament, and told him to ignore everything and just rush in. This arrangement was exactly what Guolai wanted, so he was excited to kill. At this time, Lu Junbai, who was hiding in the back of the mountain to watch the battle, twitched his eyes. Every time a house was destroyed, it was like a knife cutting his body. Purple Eyebrows' Taoist was overjoyed. He liked to fight all his life, and he was bored. At this moment, someone came to pick a fight, which was exactly what he liked, so he didn't ask at all, and shouted, "Where did this arrogant man come from? I, Xiao Lai, am coming to deal with you." He opened his mouth, and a purple smoke flew out, going straight to Guolai's face. At first, this smoke was just a little smoke, but later it became rolling purple smoke. Wherever it passed, the grass and trees immediately turned into flying ashes as soon as they touched it. Although Guolai was rampaging on the island, he always paid attention to the cave residents on the cliff. When he saw a cloud of purple smoke, he was already vigilant. At this moment, seeing the smoke, he recognized that it was the evil spirit in the Dan. With his little Jindan cultivation, it was not suitable to fight head-on, so he should avoid the limelight. However, he refused to admit defeat. With a shout, his chest bulged, and a wisp of evil spirit was forcibly lifted from the little Jindan in his abdomen, and he also opened his mouth and spat it out. His ball of baleful aura surged like raging flames and was red like mist. Its momentum wasn't the slightest bit weaker, and when it collided with the purple mist, the two miasma rolled together, causing crackling sounds to resound out like thunder. After fighting for a short while, the two miasma dispersed, and it was actually a tie. Purple Eyebrows' Taoist originally saw that Guolai's cultivation was not as good as his, so he didn't use all his strength just now. He just wanted to force Guolai away, but he didn't expect that Guolai not only did not dodge, but also blocked his evil spirit. Purple Eyebrows' Taoist's eyes couldn't help but light up. He jumped down from the cloud and rushed straight to Guolai. As he moved, he shook his shoulder, and suddenly a cloud of purple smoke like an umbrella appeared on top of his head. On the top of the cover, there was a white sword light that expanded and contracted, emitting bursts of sharp golden chi, as if it could fly out at any time to kill people. He shouted, "The person on the other side, tell me your name." Guolai laughed and said, "I'm Guolai's grandpa Gua." "Guolai? Although it was the first time Purple Eyebrows Taoist came to Donghai, he had heard his adoptive father Xiao Mu vaguely mention this name. After thinking carefully, he remembered that this person was Tao Zhenhong's eldest disciple, and his heart couldn't help but tighten. He already knew that his adoptive father came to Donghai to meet the agreement of his fellow Taoists to besiege Tao Zhenhong. Could it be that this person got the news and came in advance? At the thought of this, he broke out in a cold sweat. Tao Zhenhong was a cultivator in the third Yuanying realm, and he had never been defeated in Donghai for more than 20 years. If he came here, it was said that he was very likely to become a Dongtian Jinren in the next few years. If this person came here, even Xiao Mu had to retreat, so Purple Eyebrows Taoist didn't dare to act rashly, and said cautiously, "Taoist Gua, what are you doing here?" Gua Lai said impatiently, "I'm here to find Lu Junbai and Lu Mainyang to resolve the grievances between them. Quickly call them out to see me." Hearing this, Purple Eyebrows Taoist was relieved, thinking that it was best that Gua Lai didn't come to find him. But at this moment, he didn't know whether Gua Lai had companions with him. Now he was alone, so he couldn't be reckless. Gua Lai wanted to take advantage of his fear. At this time, seeing that Purple Eyebrows Taoist didn't move, he knew that Purple Eyebrows Taoist had been fooled. How could he show mercy? With a wave of his hand, a light curtain rose behind him, and the sky crane and flying tiger were released. Two beams of mysterious light and the green-scaled python attacked Tao Zhenhong together. Purple Eyebrows Taoist snorted coldly. Although he was afraid of Tao Zhenhong, he was not afraid of Gua Lai. He made a gesture in his hand, and the flying sword on the top of his head turned and flashed 3 times in a row, easily cutting down the 3 demon spirits formed by the soul essence. Then he said, "Go!" The flying sword turned again and slashed toward Gua Lai's head. Gua Lai was also shocked when he saw this. He wanted to dodge, but the sword light came too fast, so he hurriedly shook the light curtain and released the black tortoise's soul essence to protect himself. The sword light slashed upward and unexpectedly broke the black tortoise shell. The sword light was also blocked for a moment. It spun in the air and slashed toward Gua Lai's head again. Gua Lai knew the situation was not good. Although Purple Eyebrows Taoist's moves looked simple, he knew that Purple Eyebrows Taoist cultivated the profound sex cultivation method, and his realm was higher than Gua Lai's. Gua Lai couldn't fight him head-on, so he summoned the soul essence and demon spirit to fight with Purple Eyebrows Taoist. At the same time, he retreated, leading Purple Eyebrows Taoist to the place where Zhang Yan and the others had set up the ambush. Among the trees below, Zhang Yan and the others were hiding. He suddenly said to Lu Junbai, "That day, I saw you use the bronze mirror to capture people. What treasure is it?" Lu Junbai hesitated for a moment and then replied, "This mirror is called Mystique in the Barrier. It can capture all living things within 10 feet. As long as the head and torso are illuminated, they will be trapped in it. But if the cultivation of the person illuminated by the mirror is higher than mine, it will be useless." Zhang Yan asked again, "Can you capture the purple eyebrows?" Lu Junbai thought carefully and said with a little uncertainty, "The cultivation of the purple eyebrows is almost the same as mine. If I don't have the jade ring to protect me, I can give it a try." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I'll deal with Purple Eyebrows' magic treasure. Once he shows an opening, the two of you can attack together. This matter involves Demon King Lu's life. If we can't capture him, we have to kill him to prevent any more variables." Lu Junbai listened and nodded solemnly. Zhang Yan looked at Monster Queen Junyue and said, "Monster Queen Jing, your cultivation is the highest among us. Whether you can save Demon King Lu or not depends on whether you can restrain the purple eyebrows." Monster Queen Junyue nodded and said softly, "Senior Sister Lu has always been taking care of me. I will do my best." Zhang Yan nodded. Seeing that Gua Lai had lured the Purple Eyebrows Taoist over, he whispered something to Gua Lai. Then he operated the true form wandering method and quietly hid his body. He rode the clear chi to the sky and hid in the clouds, waiting for an opportunity to strike. At this moment, Monster Queen Junyue saw that the two were above her and shouted, "Senior Brother Gua, let me help you." The Purple Eyebrows Taoist looked over in surprise and saw a woman in silver armor and red muslin. He also knew that Tao Zhenhong had a female disciple named Wang Yingfang who was a demon cultivator. When he saw Monster Queen Junyue, he mistook her for this woman. He immediately felt that something was wrong and stopped paying attention to Guolai. Instead, he called back the flying sword, turned it in the air and slashed at Monster Queen Junyue. Monster Queen Junyue shouted and shook the spear in her hand. The tip of the spear accurately hit the flying sword. With a dang sound, the sword light was shaken off. With this gap, the purple eyebrows Taoist immediately took a few steps back, distancing himself from the two. He took out a jade bracelet from his sleeve and threw it above his head. The jade bracelet was as big as a bowl and was decorated with dragon patterns. As soon as it was in the air, a white light sprinkled down. Seeing that the bracelet was about to protect the purple eyebrows, Zhang Yan, who had been hiding on the side, saw the opportunity. With a thought, a green light flew out from the primal aperture between his eyebrows. One could vaguely recognize that it was a small and exquisite jade token. It pressed on the jade bracelet and instantly froze it in the air, preventing the spiritual qi from flowing out. Seeing the white light falling, the purple eyebrows Taoist was originally at ease. He didn't expect that it would disappear just above his head. He suddenly panicked. Below, Lu Junbai saw the opportunity and immediately turned into a white light and rushed forward. He took out an ancient bronze mirror as big as a golden basin and pointed it at the purple eyebrows Taoist. Not good. At this time, the purple eyebrows Taoist saw Lu Junbai and immediately knew that he had been fooled. Ah! With a loud cry, he shook off the killing intent on his body with all his might to protect his body. When the mirror light landed on his body, it only caused his body to involuntarily shake a few times. Surprisingly, he was not sucked away. Seeing that he couldn't take away the person, Lu Junbai was anxious. He looked at the opponent with a grin and seemed to reach in to take the restriction talisman. The flying sword above his head was spinning. He immediately knew that it was not good, but it was too late to use other methods. He could only desperately activate the bronze mirror. Zhang Yan, who was hiding in the sky, saw this. With a thought, a sword light flew out from between his eyebrows and slashed down. The flying sword seemed to have sensed it and raised its head to meet it. With a zing sound, the sword pill was bounced away. At this time, Monster Queen Junyue had already turned around. Her eyes were wide open, and with a shout, she turned the magic weapon in her hand. A red light flashed and crossed dozens of feet to stab the long spear. The purple eyebrows Taoist had no magic treasure to protect himself, and he didn't have time to escape from the mirror light. The flying sword was tricked by Zhang Yan just now, so he could only watch the spear shadow pass through his chest. He grabbed the spear shaft and glared angrily. He knew that he was going to die, so he shouted and spat a mouthful of blood on the flying sword. Everyone thought that he was going to fight back before he died, so they all stepped back subconsciously. However, the flying sword that was stained with blood did not fall, but flew up, pierced the sky in the blink of an eye, and disappeared without a trace. At first, Lu Junbai was a little confused, but then he seemed to think of something. His face turned pale and he exclaimed, "Not good, this person is using his blood as a sacrifice to inform Xiao Mu of his age." As soon as this sentence came out, except for Zhang Yan, the faces of everyone present changed greatly. If Xiao Mu's age was known and he rushed over, with the cultivation of the Yuanine cultivator, no one here would be able to survive. Chapter 181. Crossing the sea and fighting the waves. Purple eyebrows Taoist had an unyielding temperament. After spitting out a mouthful of blood essence, he was afraid that his Jindan would be stolen after his death, so he immediately screamed and said, "My adoptive father will kill you all for me." He suddenly poured a mouthful of primordial qi down and shattered the Jindan in his abdomen. His body exploded into a cloud of blood mist, and his original spirit drifted away. He died on the spot. When Zhang Yan saw this scene, he secretly felt that it was a pity. If he could let the 9 subduing magic slip absorb this person's blood essence, his divine contract might be able to reach another level. Although Monster Queen Junyue's spear pierced through purple eyebrows Taoist's chest, in fact, she deliberately avoided the vital parts and did not really kill him. She only intended to capture him alive, otherwise, this stab would have killed him. What she did was not necessarily wrong. After all, she was just a helper invited by Lu Junbai and had no hatred with the Xiao family, so there was no need to make a grudge. Secondly, holding this person as a hostage could make the other party a little more scrupulous. At that time, if Purple Eyebrows Taoist was willing to beg for mercy and take the initiative to hand over the talisman that restrained Lu Mainyang, he could have kept his life. However, he was too impatient and impetuous. He felt that these people would definitely not let him go after what he had done to Lu Mainyang. If he fell into their hands, they might even retaliate. Therefore, he would rather kill himself than be humiliated and tortured. Seeing that this person was so unyielding that they could not even catch him alive, Lu Junbai's face also became ugly. On this egret island, White Sky Demon King Lu Mainyang had been operating for a long time, and the cave residence was covered with big and small formations. However, her daughter Yen Rong had told Xiao Mu all the ways to advance and retreat. For the convenience of entering and exiting, and for fear of leaving some unknown backups, Xiao Mu had forcibly demolished many formations. Only a few were left, which was of no use to him. Now there was no place on this island that could be relied on. If the flying sword was taken away, if Xiao Mu came back to seek revenge, where could they escape to on this vast ocean? A trace of regret appeared on Monster Queen Juanyue's pretty face. If she had been ruthless earlier, how could this happen? Guolai looked indifferent and said with a smile, "If we can't beat him, we can just leave. At the worst, we can just split up and split up." Zhang Yan remained calm and decisively said, "Fellow Taoist Lu, please rescue Demon King Lu as soon as possible. We'll rush back to our Dragon Nation's ark. With our combined strength and the protection of the restriction, we can even resist the fierce attacks of a nascent soul cultivator for a while." Lu Junbai's spirits were refreshed as if he'd found a life-saving straw, and he nodded repeatedly. He didn't have the time to say anything before hastily running into the abode. Not long after, he carried out a white-clothed, black-haired woman. She was panting and her face was pale. She looked weak and weak. Demon Monarch Jun Yu rushed forward and asked, "Senior Sister Lu, how are you? Are you Junior Sister Jing?" "I'm fine." The woman opened her eyes and said weakly, "I have taken off the talisman and pulled out the golden nails. It's just that my sister had a fierce battle with Xiao Mu and was restrained for a long time. She is a little weak, but she will recover after some rest." Lu Mainyang forced herself to raise her head and looked at Zhang Yan, who was not far away. She said softly, "This is fellow Taoist Zhang, right? I can't thank you enough." Zhang Yan quickly stepped forward and cupped his hands to stop her. "Monster King Lu, you are too polite. This is not a good place to talk. We should leave as soon as possible." Lu Mainyang nodded and glanced at the surroundings of the island with a slight sense of loss. She seemed to be a little reluctant to leave. She patted Lu Junbai's shoulder and said, "Little brother, listen to fellow Taoist Zhang." "Sister," Lu Junbai replied, "you can climb steadily." He leaped up and turned into a white rainbow, and in an instant he was on top of the cloud. The others also flew up into the sky and left the island. A few hundred miles away, Xiao Han stood on a small island with his hands behind his back. He looked at the black mountain in front of him. He wore a tall hat and a wide belt. His clothes fluttered in the wind. Coupled with his handsome appearance, he looked indescribably elegant. Beside him stood a slender girl with long sleeves and a picturesque face. Her beautiful eyes were looking at him with deep affection. From time to time, the two of them would whisper to each other, and from time to time, they would laugh. Not far away from them, a Daorin was lying on the clouds. His eyes were half closed, but there was a flash of lightning in his eyes. However, at this moment, a white light flashed in the sky. A flying sword pierced through the clouds. The old Taoist furrowed his brows and waved his hand. The flying sword fell to the ground. He used 2 fingers to hold it and examined the qi of blood on it. After calculating with his fingers, he sighed and said, "Xiao Lai, oh Xiao Lai, you didn't listen to me, so you died and your Tao disappeared." Xiao Han also noticed the abnormality. He pushed the girl away and asked, "Fourth uncle, what's the matter?" The old Taoist priest indifferently said, "Your sworn brother, Xiao Lai, was killed." "What?" Xiao Han was shocked and angry. He said, "Who dared to kill a member of the Xiao clan?" Daoren said expressionlessly, "This matter must have something to do with Lu Mainyang." The girl was shocked. She quickly grabbed Xiao Han's arm and said anxiously, "Brother Xiao, mother was locked in the quiet room. How could she do such a thing? Did senior make a mistake?" Xiao Han waved his sleeve and broke free from her hand. He said coldly, "Why would my fourth uncle speak nonsense?" Seeing his expression change, the girl didn't dare to say anything. Her eyes were red and she looked wronged. Xiao Han coldly snorted and raised his hand to straighten his belt. He took 2 steps forward and bowed to the old Taoist and said, "Fourth uncle, please avenge my sworn brother." Xiao Mujui's gaze was cold as he said, "I warned Xiao Lai a long time ago that he was courting death if he didn't listen to me, and it has nothing to do with anyone else. If you come to beg me, you have to follow the rules. I promised fifth brother that you can ask me for 3 things. I won't ask for anything else. Escorting you to the Eastern Sea is the first. You begged me to take down Lu Mainyang is the second. Now you're begging me for help. This is the third. After these 3 things are done, even if your life is in danger, I won't help you. You have to think carefully." Xiao Han knew that people like his fourth uncle, who were Yuanying enlightened masters, valued their own lives. If it wasn't for the fact that the matter involved karma, or if there was a great benefit in improving one's cultivation, he wouldn't help a junior disciple. However, Xiao Han thought that after this trip to the Eastern Sea, when he returned home, he would be able to build his gold core. In the future, he could look for a master with a profound cultivation base to be his apprentice, and he wouldn't need to bother this indifferent fourth uncle anymore. So, he gritted his teeth and said, "Xiao Lai's sworn brother and I were good friends. Now that he was murdered, if I don't avenge him, where would the reputation of the Xiao clan go? Fourth uncle, please avenge my sworn brother and kill the person who harmed him." After he finished speaking, he bowed deeply. Although his words sounded dignified, his real reason was not so. It was a pity that Xiao Lai had died, but the relationship between the two of them was not that deep. However, he could not even avenge the death of someone close to him. In the future, once he established his own clan, who in the clan would want to rely on him? Moreover, he faintly felt that this matter wasn't that simple. Lu Junbai hadn't returned yet, and this matter seemed to be related to someone else. If he could solve this once and for all, it would be the best. Xiao Mu looked at him and said slowly, "Have you thought it through?" Xiao Han bowed again and said seriously, "Fourth uncle, please make your move. Kill every single one of them." Xiao Mu nodded and stood up from the cloud. As his Taoist robe fluttered, a ray of light rose and disappeared in a flash. Zhang Yan and the others had already used their flying lights to the limit. When they saw the figure of the Dragon Country's ship appear in front of them, they all relaxed a little. But at this moment, a thunderclap came from above the clouds. A cloud followed, and on it sat a purple-robed Daoren. He saw that the 5 people in front of him were flying away, and there was a disdainful look in his eyes. He straightened his palm and muttered something. After a while, he gently grabbed and released his hand, and a cloud of clear air fell. In an instant, wind and thunder rose from the flat ground, and a gust of wind rolled up thousands of tons of seawater, forming a circle of huge waves that surrounded Zhang Yan and the others. His cold voice seemed to come from above the 9 heavens. "You are just fish in a shallow pond. Where can you go?" Lu Junbai looked at the towering waves around him that rose high but didn't fall down, and then looked at Daoren who was chasing from the sky. He smiled bitterly, knowing that he couldn't escape today. He gently helped Lu Mainyang down from his back and said to Zhang Yan, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, I'll have to trouble you to take care of my sister later." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Lu Junbai turned to Guolai and said, "Fellow Taoist Guo, life and death are at stake. We have no choice but to advance." Guolai laughed loudly. "Other than my master, I have never fought with a Yuanying cultivator before. Today, I will have a taste of it." Although Monster Monarch Jun Yu looked delicate, she knew that there was no way out in this situation. If she didn't fight, she would die. With a shout, her body turned into a rainbow light, and she was the first to rush up. The divine weapon in her hand stabbed towards Doran's head. Daoren was expressionless. He stretched out a finger, and a thin white gas gushed out from his fingertip, easily blocking the silver spear. Lu Junbai knew that the three of them would only have a chance of survival if they worked together. When Monster Monarch Junyu rushed out, he followed suit. However, before he could even get close, the old Taoist flicked his sleeve and a gust of wind swept him in. In an instant he felt dizzy. He spun around 100 times and felt weak all over. After an unknown period of time, he bit the tip of his tongue, and with a loud cry, he revealed his true form. An egret with a crest on its head, yellow eyes, black beak, and a body of white feathers broke through the smoke. It let out a clear cry, and turned to peck at Doran's head. The old Taoist sneered coldly, "How dare a coward like you show off?" Just as he was about to attack, he frowned and dodged the spear. The cloud of smoke fell from his fingertip and blocked Monster Monarch Junyu's next attack. Although Guolai was a step slower, he was still on top of the cloud. He shook off the mysterious light, took out a talisman, and slapped it on the light screen behind him. Then, a strand of essence chi rushed out of the light screen behind him, and with a deafening roar, a ferocious-looking white ape rushed out of the light screen. The old Taoist had a cold smile on his face. He flipped his palm, and with a crackling sound, a bolt of purple lightning struck towards Guolai. This ball of purple lightning came too quickly. Guolai didn't even have time to react. However, the moment it touched his body, a jade token flew out from between his eyebrows. This jade token released a circle of light, and there was a talisman faintly visible within it. The talisman stretched and shrank, and it swallowed the purple lightning. Doran frowned and said, It's Tao Jinhong's virtue-protecting charm token?" Guolai calmed down after escaping death, and shouted, "Everyone kill! Let's kill this Doran!" Monster Monarch Junyu and Lu Junbai rushed forward without a word. Doran saw the three of them coming at him together, and a trace of anger flashed in his eyes. He shouted, and a ray of light shot out from the top of his head. The light spread out like a fan, and in a split second, the clouds and smoke were dispersed. In the middle of the light was a Yuanying statue, and its body was covered in light gold. Its face was the same as Xiao Mu's, and it held a horsetail whisk in its left hand and a dharma plate in its right. Under its feet, it stood on the wind and clouds, and it looked dignified and solemn. It looked down from above and said with a thunderous voice, "A few core formation cultivators dare to fight with me?" Chapter 182. Raging waves, rolling snake, swallowing elephant. In the state of Yuanying, one could be called a perfected person. One could be called a Taoist master with a lifespan of 1,000 years. Their every movement was accompanied by magical power, and their bodies were filled with great power. Previously, Xiao Muzhui did not put Lu Junbai and the others in his eyes, but now that he saw the three of them acting recklessly, he laughed in his heart and released his newly formed nascent soul. As soon as this Yuanying was released, the spiritual vigor within a radius of 10 miles was stirred up. The sea churned and the wind blew violently. Colorful lights flashed in the clouds as if they were dyed by the sunset. Her body emitted an unparalleled power, causing the breath of the three of them to stagnate. Demon Queen Yuanying had the highest cultivation level among the three. Although she looked weak, she had cultivated in the Dharma of Strength path. Her body was like a piece of steel, and she was not afraid of ordinary Dharma. Therefore, she stretched her arm and shook the end of her silver spear. There was an explosive sound in the air, and the spear flashed like a poisonous python, rushing towards her opponent again. Xiao Muzhui's eyes were filled with disdain. He raised his nascent soul and gently flicked the horsetail whisk in his hand, blocking Demon Monarch Junyue and her spear to the side. Monster Monarch Junyu felt a tenacious force pulling her to the side. She couldn't help but take a few steps forward. Just as she was about to retrieve her spear, the nascent soul's expression suddenly turned solemn, and a thunderous roar rang out. Demon Queen Junyue felt a boom in her head. She felt dizzy as if she was hit by a heavy blow. She could not hold the divine weapon steadily, and her body swayed. Before she could steady herself, Yuanying pointed her finger and purple lightning fell. Demon Monarch Junyu barely managed to block the lightning with her silver spear. Her body trembled violently as blood flowed from her eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. Finally, with a loud boom, the divine weapon in her hand was knocked out of her hand. She was also sent flying dozens of feet away. Her footsteps became unsteady and she looked as if she was about to fall off the clouds. Seeing that she would die on the spot after a few more bolts of purple lightning, a black shadow appeared above Yuanying's head. Lu Junbai flapped his wings and dived down, pecking at Yuanying's eyes. Yuanying's face remained expressionless. With a wave of the horsetail whisk in her hand, it transformed into thousands of strands of hair-like silver threads that curled upwards and immediately bound Lu Junbai. No matter how hard Lu Junbai struggled, he was unable to break free. Xiao Mu snorted coldly and said, "It just so happens that I lack a spirit bird to guard my abode, or else I won't spare you." Yuanying stretched out her hand and patted Lu Junbai's head, and then threw him on top of the cloud. Just like that, he lost his consciousness. Xiao Mu shook his hand and put him into his sleeve. A loud roar resounded in the sky. A white ape tore apart the smoke barrier in front of the nascent soul, and brazenly rushed in. But before it could reach the nascent soul, it heard a series of thunderclaps. Then, purple lightning flashed in a disorderly manner like a snake, and it was shredded into pieces in the blink of an eye. Even that mass of essence dispersed in the air was extinguished under the illumination of the clear light. Yuanying flipped her palm and launched several palm thunders at Guolai. Even with the protective charm, Guolai could not withstand it. He screamed repeatedly and retreated hundreds of feet away. On the other side, Demon Queen Junyue finally caught her breath. She activated her Xian Qi and immediately healed her injuries. She raised her head and glared at Xiao Mu. She opened her cherry lips and let out a piercing cry towards the sky. Impressively, she revealed her true form of a great demon. A 10-feet-long golden-crowned brocaded pheasant flew into the sky. Its feathers were like raging flames. It had a blue back and brown feet. Its long tail was bright and eye-catching. As it swayed, it carried a misty smoke. With a flap of its wings, it flew over 100 feet and a pair of dark brown sharp claws clawed towards Yuanying. Seeing her gorgeous feathers, Xiao Mu was not surprised but happy. He said, "Good, I've taken Elder Chio's demon-subduing ring. Daoren is still lacking a mount. But you have delivered yourself to me." He took out a dazzling hoop from his sleeve and tossed it forward. The hoop spun in the air and the golden talismans within it flickered wildly. 8 positions and 8 gates appeared. As if it knew the way, it fell down and wrapped itself around Monster Monarch Junyu's neck. It then tightened and shrunk. Monster Monarch Junyu couldn't help but let out a miserable cry and fell to the ground. She lay at Xiao Mujui's feet and could no longer move. When the 4 of them made their move, Zhang Yan supported Lu Mainyang and watched the battle from the side. As for Xiao Mu, he already had the Dark North Heavenly Sword avatar in his hand. Therefore, he already had the intention to plot against him. However, he was meticulous and did not dare to be careless when facing the Yuanying cultivator. If he missed in one strike, wouldn't he lose his life? Therefore, he had to leave a path of retreat for himself. Originally, he wanted to rely on Dragon Country's big ship and think of a way to incite these core formation cultivators to attack Xiao Mu together while he looked for an opportunity to injure the enemy. If he could kill this person on the spot, not only would he get rid of a huge threat, these core formation cultivators would also be completely tied to him. Although he was currently trapped and could not reach Dragon Country's big ship, it was not that he had no other options. At worst, he could summon the demon treasury and hide in it. Even if Xiao Mu could catch up to him, he would not be able to do anything to him for the time being. When the 3 of them besieged Xiao Muzhui, he had tried to activate the purple light between his eyebrows, but he had a feeling that he was still lacking something. Even if he were to use this sword, he might not be able to hurt his opponent. As for what it was, he had a vague idea in his mind, but he could not quite grasp it. At this moment, Lu Mainyang, who was standing beside him, had recovered some of her strength. She saw that after Xiao Mu came out of the Yuanying, he either subdued or repelled the people. She knew that it was futile for her to go up. She gritted her teeth and grabbed Zhang Yan's wrist, saying, "Fellow Taoist ran around to save my life. It is my Lu family's business to rely on you to escape. How can I let fellow Taoist lose his life today? Even if I die, I won't let fellow Taoist be harmed. As soon as she finished speaking, she did not wait for Zhang Yan to speak. She pointed with her slender finger, and a jade hairpin with a phoenix flew out from her hair. It collided with the mist in front of them, creating a path with a boom. She hugged Zhang Yan and turned into a magnificent rainbow, flying straight to Dragon Country's big ship. With the two demons captured and Lu Meinyang gone, Guolai saw that the situation was not good, so he also turned into a beam of light and disappeared into the sea in the blink of an eye. Xiaomu hesitated for a moment. Although he came here to besiege Tao Zhenhong, it was not the time to turn hostile. If Tao Zhenhong came to him because of the death of his disciples, he would not be able to stop him. He thought to himself, I'll let you go for now. It won't be too late to deal with you after I deal with Tao Zhenhong with the other Taoists. Right now, Zhang Yan and Lu Meinyang can't escape. Thinking of this, he shook his shoulder and put away his yuaning. He turned into a beam of mist and chased after Zhang Yan. In fact, Lu Meinyang hadn't recovered much of her primordial qi. She had just released her Dharma treasures and flew for a while, so she was already exhausted. Seeing that the ship of Qi Dragon was right in front of her, she bit the tip of her tongue and flew even faster. When she reached the deck of the ship, she relaxed and fainted. Zhang Yan hurriedly supported her body. At this moment, he had already felt the fierce murderous aura coming from behind him. The sword pill between his eyebrows twitched uneasily. However, this small movement was like a beam of light that illuminated his sea of consciousness. His previous doubts were suddenly cleared up. So that was it. He turned back to look at the fierce beam of mist. Holding Lu Meinyang, he jumped up and turned into a beam of light that went straight to the treasure pavilion. However, he purposely paused when he moved. Xiaomu saw that Zhang Yan was about to hide in the huge ship. Although he did not recognize Dragon Country's big ship, he knew that this kind of ship must have extremely powerful restrictions. He knew that if he was one step late, he would not be able to take down this junior. Therefore, he shouted and activated all the magic power in his body. He flashed in the air and in almost a breath's time, he followed Zhang Yan into the treasure pavilion. Feeling the figure behind him, Zhang Yan felt a pressure from between life and death. He shouted in his heart, "Senior North Sea, help me!" As if it had heard his call, the purple sword light suspended in the space between its eyebrows suddenly trembled, and with a whistling sound, a cold sword light that could tear apart heaven and earth instantly broke free from its shackles, and brazenly rushed out like an ancient fierce beast. Just as Xiao Muzhui rushed in, the sneer on his face suddenly froze and was replaced by an expression of extreme fear. He let out a roar and his nascent soul shook off the light and appeared in front of Xiao Muzhui to block the attack while he himself retreated. His line of sight was obscured by a brilliant sword ray that seemed to be able to cut through everything. The mighty nascent soul was split into two by this sword ray from head to tail as if it was soft mud. Then, it rushed to his front and disappeared in a flash. Xiao Mu's body stiffened, and a line of blood appeared between his eyebrows, from which blood slowly seeped out. He glared venomously at Zhang Yan, then silently clutched his chest, turning and stumbling as he ran outside. When he reached the deck, he soared into the clouds, swaying as he floated off into the distance. Zhang Yan walked out of the treasure's pavilion, his eyes narrowing slightly. He finally understood that this clone of the Dark North Sword would only be controlled by him at full strength when he was truly in a life or death situation. Otherwise, even if he did use it, its power would not be apparent. This Xiao Mu was worthy of being a yuaning cultivator. Even though he had been heavily injured, he still relied on his profound cultivation to hold on and not die. This was also because Zhang Yan's cultivation was not high enough, and he was unable to completely control the power of the Dark North Sword. Otherwise, that chop would definitely have taken Xiao Mu's life. However, after this attempt, he had already understood the temperament of this sword clone. If it was the next time, he would know how to act. Looking at his opponent's figure, Zhang Yan laughed coldly. At this point, how could he allow this person to escape alive? He did not chase after him, but instead turned into a streak of light and entered the ship. He sat down on the first floor of the treasure's pavilion, took out the talisman, and with a roar, the 36 dragon-climbing pillars of the dragon country's great arc began to move at the same time, giving rise to a huge wave as he charged towards his opponent. Xiao Mu was currently flying forward with great difficulty. This time, the Yuanying had been shattered, and his hundreds of years of cultivation had been directly destroyed by Zhang Yan. It was only because of the secret technique of his clan, the true calming jade, that he was able to preserve his life and hang on to a single strand of Xiantian Yuan Qi, that he did not die on the spot. However, at the moment he could barely use a lightning palm. He thought bitterly in his heart, if this Zhang Yan recklessly chases after me, I will definitely teach him a lesson. If he doesn't come, after I recover from my injuries and come out of seclusion, I will tear this person into 1,000 pieces. Just as he was gnashing his teeth, he heard the rumbling of thunder behind him. Looking back, he could not help but be scared out of his wits. The dragon country's great ark's huge body was flowing with restrictions, breaking through the huge waves and rushing towards him with the momentum of a divine mountain. He did not expect Zhang Yan to be so ferocious. At this moment, he could not care about anything else. With a roar, he desperately tried to dodge. However, his injuries were too severe, and it was already too late for him to dodge. The dragon head horn in front of the dragon country's great arc slammed into his back with great force. This collision was like a mountain, causing smoke to come out of his mouth and nose, and blood to spurt out crazily. The jade pendant on his chest also cracked with a ka sound, and his body fell straight into the water. Zhang Yan frowned. Seeing that this person was still not dead, he also made up his mind. He jumped into the water, and the blue cloud mystic light spread out, separating the waves. With a wave of his sleeve, a 6-story treasure tower flew out, and with a flash, he turned into a light and went above the 3rd story. With a hong sound, the devil treasury moved, and with just one move, it caught up to Xiao Mu, aiming at him and ramming again. A muffled sound came from the sea. After suffering the collision just now, Xiao Mu's bones were already all broken, and his internal organs were broken. Now that he was injured again, he screamed, and the jade pendant on his chest broke with a pa sound. Golden light spurted out from his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose, and he instantly died on the spot. An original spirit floated up from the corpse, but it quickly flew towards the northwest direction, as if it was going to escape. However, it only flew for a few hundred feet. Celestial sounds came from the sky, and a crystal-clear jade slip flew out from the devil treasury. In a flash, it caught up to him, circled around him, and sucked him in. Chapter 183. After absorbing the original spirit, the 9-absorption devil slip didn't stop. With a flip, it lay on top of Xiao Mu's body and shuttled back and forth a few times, sucking up all the essence blood. With a clear sound, it turned into a dazzling light and went to the dragon country's big boat to find the broken Yuanying and swallowed it as well. The slip's actions were equivalent to swallowing an entire Yuanying cultivator. After going around a few more times and seeing that there was nothing left to swallow, the slip's body shook and the sound of a bell could be heard. Its whole body was filled with clear air and emitted a brilliant glow. When Zhang Yan returned to the dragon boat, it didn't wait for him to raise his hand and let out a happy cry and went into the space between his eyebrows. Zhang Yan's eyes shone with a strange light. This jade slip seemed to be tame in the past, but it was actually arrogant and unruly. It would be fine if he didn't take it, but if he touched it, a violent and bloodthirsty aura would surge and try to influence his mind. Moreover, regardless of whether he was willing or not, it would spit out the essence qi. However, it wasn't like that today. It was much more obedient than usual. He focused his mind on the acupoint and saw that the magic slip was floating there without any signs of movement. Vaguely, it seemed to have lost some of its fierceness and gained a hint of spirituality. On the surface, it looked more and more like an immortal treasure. He thought that the essence qi absorbed this time should be enough for him to push the divine contract to another level, but now was not the time to calm down and cultivate. At this time, he heard a soft sigh. He turned his head and saw that Lu Mainyang had slowly woken up. She opened her eyes and saw Zhang Yan at first glance. She immediately sat up and looked around. Her tense expression relaxed and she asked, "Fellow Zhang, has Xiao Mu left?" This demoness queen's almond-shaped eyes were slightly frightened. Her robe was messy, her black hair fell like a waterfall, and her skin was as white as porcelain. At this moment, she bit her lower lip with her silver teeth and pressed her hand on her chest. There was a natural seductive expression on her face. She was worthy of the name Mainyang. Zhang Yan didn't seem to notice the flirtatious expression on her face as he smiled lightly. He said, "Demon King Lu, don't worry. I have the help of a master in my sect. This person will not come to disturb us again." Lu Mainyang was stunned at first. After pondering over the meaning behind Zhang Yan's words, her beautiful eyes lit up and she nodded. He was completely relieved. He didn't mention this matter again. She didn't doubt his words. She guessed that a true disciple like Zhang Yan, who was in charge of his own territory, would probably be like Xiao Han, protected by a powerful figure in the sect. As for why this person didn't come out to save Lu Junbai and the others, she didn't find it strange. If the masters of Qinsong School didn't involve the lives of their own disciples, they wouldn't have come out to save them. Presumably, it wouldn't show itself easily, much less pay attention to demon cultivators like them. Zhang Yan took out 2 talismans that were about a finger thick from his sleeve and said, "These 2 items contain Daozhong Lu and Demon King Jing. My cultivation is shallow, so I can't think of anything. Demon King Lu's magic power is profound, so he should be able to undo the restriction." Before he boarded the ship, he had already taken the sleeve from Xiao Mu's corpse. After a rough search, he found that there were quite a lot of things inside, but with his current cultivation he didn't dare to act rashly. Who knew if there were any powerful restrictions placed on them? Since he already got them, he might as well take his time to sort them out in the future. Other than that, there were these 2 jade tokens. The original figures of Lu Junbai and Jing Miaojuan appeared on each of the tokens. With just one look, it was obvious that these 2 people were imprisoned in these items. Lu Mainyang stood up and raised her hand to receive it. She gently stroked it for a while, then sighed softly and put it down. A look of distress appeared on her face. The jade token that Xiao Mu used seems to be the Nanhua sect's sealing talisman. I can't do anything about it. Among the 10 great mystic sects of Donghua continent, Nanhua sect was the most feared by demon cultivators, followed by Qinsong and Shaoqing sect. This was because these sects were extremely good at subduing demons, and most of their techniques were focused on how to restrain demon cultivators. This restriction was not something she could easily undo. Zhang Yan pondered for a while and said, "Don't worry, Demon King Lu. I know someone who can undo this restriction." Hearing that, Lu Mainyang hurriedly bowed and said, "Please give me some pointers, Demon King Lu." Seeing this, Zhang Yan stretched out his hand to help her up and said, "Demon King Lu, there's no need to be so polite. Do you still remember fellow Taoist Guolai? This person is the disciple of Tao Zhenren, Tao Zhenren. Tao Zhenren was originally cultivating under Nanhua sect and only left later. His cultivation is also above Xiao Mu's, so there's a high chance that he can undo this restriction." Joy appeared in Lu Mainyang's beautiful eyes, but then she said worriedly, "I have no contact with Tao Zhenren, nor do we have any friendship. Why would he be willing to help me?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Before coming here, I promised fellow Taoist Guo a benefit. If I talk to him about this matter, I believe he will give me some face." Lu Mainyang bowed again and said seriously, "If you can get Tao Zhenren to help you, fellow Taoist, if you need anything in the future, please don't hesitate to order me." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist is too polite. I just saw fellow Taoist Guo escape during the chaos. With his temper, he won't leave easily. Why don't we wait here for a few days? If he doesn't come, I'll go get the 4 Marquises' water and then go find him." Lu Mainyang nodded and said, "As you say." She was a gentle person, and she didn't have a mind of her own, so she didn't have any objections. Zhang Yan said again, "There are many courtyards and pavilions on this Dragon Country ship. Fellow Taoist can choose one to cultivate in." After saying that, he excused himself and returned to the treasure pavilion. Sitting in the quiet room, he activated the restriction and with a thought, the 9 absorption demons subduing slip in his acupoints trembled and released the essence within it. Previously, When Zhang Yan was cultivating, he had activated the jade slip and received only a few strands of essence qi. But now, it was unprecedentedly plentiful. Moreover, it directly entered his acupoints without a trace of waste. He felt the qi flow surging towards him, and in an instant, it flowed through his entire body. He sat down and calmed his mind, emptied his mind, and waited for the essence to settle down. Then, he began to circulate his xian qi according to the mind-comprehending contract. In less than 4 hours, all the acupoints in his body started to move together, pushing his xian qi up. At this time, a faint layer of gold and bronze appeared on the surface of his body, but after a moment, it disappeared. Then, a hazy mist of light came out from his mouth and nose, turning into hundreds of faintly visible flood dragons that circled around him. As the circulation of the mantra became smoother and smoother, the mass of essence qi in his abdomen gradually warmed up. It swallowed and spat out, advancing and retreating back and forth. After a few breaths, there was a swooshing sound, as if there was a mass of heavy water swaying inside, causing his body to gently sway. After another 4 hours, the mass of essence shook and leaped up. Zhang Yan opened his eyes, opened his mouth, and spat out a mass of white light. The flood dragons were like pearls chasing after pearls, circling and dancing around the white light. Every time they circled around, a strand of it would disappear. At the end, there was only a mass of qi circling around. At this time, this mass of qi was like lightning, flashing 3 times between bright and dark. It drilled into his Shin-Kei acupoint and turned back into a mass of essence, like a statue of a deity sitting inside. That wisp of qi also followed, but it went into his spine. Zhang Yan only felt a numbing sensation from his joints to the jade pillow. A series of cracking sounds came from his ears, and he unconsciously straightened his body. At this time, there was a qi pushing out from his abdomen, colliding with the 12-story building. His throat was wide open, and he couldn't help but raise his head and open his mouth. A gust of white qi pierced through the air, more than 30 feet in length. There was a faint light on it, and a muffled sound of thunder exploded in the air. The rumbling sound lasted for a long time, and just now, it dissipated. Zhang Yan slowly inhaled and exhaled. After repeating this a few times, he stabilized the qi that was floating around his body. This time, there was actually a lot of essence in the 9 absorption magic slip, but he was not greedy. He circulated the mental cultivation method a few times and returned the excess essence. At this time, he felt refreshed, and the strength in his body was endless. His toes lightly touched the ground, and without the support of his qi, he easily stood up. His heart moved, and he took out the beast-faced broadsword from his sleeve. He held the hilt in his hand and waved it a few times without moving his upper body. He felt that the heavy-duty divine weapon was now as light as a straw in his hand. He turned his mind and silently examined himself. He knew that he had already stepped into the 2nd realm of the complete spirit contract, and was actually not much weaker than his Tai Shen light. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. This method was indeed worthy of being called the devil sex method. As long as there was the essence that was plundered, he would be able to improve. However, the more he cultivated this method, the more dangerous it would be, and the harder it would be to cultivate. It was just that after reaching the 2nd realm, he didn't know how much stronger his physical body was than before. With a thought, a mysterious light burst out from the top of his head, and the golden fire light fell down, brushing against his right hand. He felt a slight pain in his arm, and there was an ear-piercing sound, as if 2 divine weapons were rubbing against each other. He quickly retracted the mysterious light, and saw that a shallow layer of his skin and flesh was scraped off, but there was no blood flowing out. After circulating the method, he immediately recovered. Seeing this scene, he was both surprised and satisfied. His golden firelight was extremely overbearing, and when it brushed down, even the 9 Demon King's doppelganger would have a layer of blood and skin scraped off. Compared to it, he seemed to be slightly better. With this method to protect himself, he wouldn't be afraid of ordinary magical weapons. He let out a long breath and kept the divine weapon. He sat down again, circulating the method, and absorbed the remaining essence in the tip of the hair into his acupuncture points. After some time, he seemed to have sensed something, and he raised his head with a smile. He turned into a ray of light and went out of the treasure pavilion. When he reached the deck, he stood with his hands behind his back and smiled. "Fellow Taoist Gua, why are you in such a sorry state?" A burly man with charred hair and beard was lying on the deck, gasping for breath. The prung bird beside him, however, did not have the slightest bit of hair on its body, and it was hilarious to see. Gua Lai shook his head and raised his hand to slap a few more times. Only then did he prop himself up and said with lingering fear, "That old man Zhao's palm thunder is so powerful, it almost made me lose my life." He then said in annoyance, "This time, my demon spirit essence was destroyed by that old man, and even the white ape spirit essence that I shamelessly asked my master to give me was destroyed. This deal is really a loss." How could Zhang Yan not understand the meaning in his words? He smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, you don't have to complain, I won't go back on my words. When I get the moon leaf xuanzhen grass to make elixir water, I'll give it to you, and I'll add some spirit shells as compensation." Chapter 184. Black Mountain fighting for water. The saber cleaves Xiao Honggualai took the brunt of Xiao Mu's thunder palms and was seriously injured. He hadn't fully recovered yet, and after the fierce battle, his injuries were even worse. The wind was strong and the waves were strong, so he didn't have a place to heal. However, he kept his word. Although he escaped, he didn't go far and still returned. Now that he was fine, he didn't have the mood to ask about Xiao Mu's condition. He asked Zhang Yan for a few medicinal pills and went to the quiet room to heal. The next day, Lu Mainyang recovered her mana after a night of rest. She came out to thank him. Zhang Yan exchanged a few polite words with her and calculated the time. It was already the middle of the 10th month, so it was time to go get the water. He didn't waste any more time and drove the Dragon Country's ship straight to Black Mountain Island. On the way, Lu Mainyang, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said softly, "I'm afraid my daughter Yan Rong is with Xiao Han. She's young and inexperienced. If she offends him later, I hope you can forgive her." This girl was Elder Yan's youngest daughter. She was born in her mother's womb for more than 3 years. When she was born, she had a cultivation technique cave and was protected by elders. She hadn't experienced any hardships. Even after cultivating for more than 100 years, she was only at Ming Qi level. Earlier, it was this girl who told Xiao Han about the island's restrictions, which caught Lu Mainyang off guard and trapped her. Zhang Yan couldn't be bothered to ask about such a person at all, and he just pointed at her. "Fellow Taoist Lu, this is your family's matter, so I naturally won't interfere. But if anyone rashly interferes in the matter between me and Xiao Han, then don't blame me for not showing mercy." Hearing the murderous intent in Zhang Yan's words, Lu Mainyang's heart tightened. Although her cultivation was much higher than Zhang Yan's, she didn't know why she couldn't help but feel a sense of fear when standing next to him. She quickly said, "Thank you, fellow Lu. When we get there, I will discipline her well." Zhang Yan nodded and said no more. Not long after the dragon boat traveled, a small island with a circumference of less than 10 miles appeared in front of them. There were thousands of egrets flying and circling around the island. In the middle of the island, there was a black mountain that looked like a mound of earth. It pierced through the sky and was covered by fog. Lu Mainyang gazed from afar for a while and suddenly said, "Taoist Zhang, if you want to take the 4 Marquises' water, I'm afraid you'll have to wait until next month." Zhang Yan looked at her and said, "Why do you say so?" Lu Mainyang gently rolled up her sleeves and pointed to the sky, saying, "Fellow Taoist, please take a look. There is a cloud below the Black Mountain, and this is the sign of the 60-year season's sweet rain. However, it is not fully ripe yet, so the color is white, and the color is multicolored. This is the time." Zhang Yan looked up and saw that, just as Lu Mainyang had said, there was a motionless white cloud leaning against the mountainside. Lu Mainyang had lived here for hundreds of years and was the owner of this place. She knew the surroundings like the back of her hand, so what she said was not a lie. Zhang Yan looked at the island and his eyes were deep. He said, "As to who this water belongs to, I, Xiao Han, will have to fight it out. Demon King Lu, if you find it difficult, you can leave. Although Lu Mainyang had a gentle temperament, she was also a great demon that had cultivated for hundreds of years. She could naturally see that Zhang Yan had the intention to recruit her, so he was letting her choose whether to stay or leave. Yan Jingting once said in the letter that Zhang Yan had a bright future. She weighed the pros and cons and thought to herself, I have cultivated for almost 500 years. If I can't step into the Yuaning realm, I will only have 100 years left. This Taoist Zhang's heavenly lake of Zhaoyu is a cave. If I can cultivate there just now, there is hope for me to peek into Tao. Thus, she only hesitated for a moment and made a decision. She said, I am willing to go with you. Zhang Yan smiled and nodded, come with me, my friend. He turned into a conveyance light and flew toward the island. Lu Mainyang also followed. When he got closer, Zhang Yan's eyes swept across the entire island. He saw two people standing on top of a mountain rock. One of them was a handsome man with a tall hat and a wide belt, but he exuded an air of arrogance. Beside him stood a woman in white. Her appearance and figure were excellent, and her facial features vaguely resembled Lu Mainyang. She must be Yen Rong. Seeing two conveyance lights flying over, Xiao Han turned his head. Although he had never seen Zhang Yan before, he had seen his portrait before he left home. Now that he saw it, he was shocked. He turned his gaze again and saw that the other person was Lu Mainyang. His expression changed slightly. In an instant, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. He couldn't help but panic and scolded, what is fourth uncle doing? He can't even handle such a small matter properly. How did he let these two people get together? However, no matter how hard he thought, he would never have thought that Xiao Mu had already been eliminated by Zhang Yan. He thought that Xiao Mu had missed these two people when he was chasing the enemy. Lu Mainyang's conveyance light landed. She put on a straight face and said to the girl coldly, Rong, why are you not coming? Yen Rong's pretty face was slightly panicked. She looked at Xiao Han and said timidly, Mother, why are you here? Aren't you? Lu Mainyang sighed and said, I was helped by fellow Zhang to escape. I owe him a favor and I must repay him. If you come here now, you are still my daughter. Hearing this, Xiao Han frowned and thought that things were not good. Yen Rong's face turned pale. She hesitated for a while and finally shook her head, as if she had made up her mind. She moved to Xiao Han's side and leaned on him. She said, Mother, I love Xiao Lang and have already married him. Since I am the wife of the Xiao family, I am also a member of the Xiao family. Please forgive me for being unfilial. Lu Mainyang was so angry that her face turned green. Her chest heaved up and down. She raised her slender finger and pointed at her, saying, You, if you don't come here, I won't recognize. She originally said that she wouldn't recognize Yen Rong as her daughter, but she was still her own flesh and blood after all. Yen Rong, on the other hand, was ruthless. She turned her head and said in a low voice, Mother, just pretend that you don't have a daughter like me. At first, Xiao Han wanted to use Yen Rong to prevent Lu Mainyang from interfering. But after hearing what Yen Rong said, he couldn't help but shake his head and scold himself for being stupid. Hearing this, Lu Mainyang felt as if she was struck by lightning. She pressed her hand on her chest and took 2 steps back. She was completely disheartened. She sighed and said, Forget it. What's the use of keeping such a vile child who doesn't recognize her parents? She raised her hand and slapped. A white gas flew out and hit Yen Rong's forehead. With a crack, Yen Rong fell to the ground. She was dead. Xiao Han frowned slightly and took a step to the side. He tidied up his sleeves as if he was afraid that the blood would stain his robe. He looked up at Zhang Yan and said coldly, You are Zhang Yan? You must be here for the 4 Marquises' water. But even if you invited the demon cultivators from overseas to help, I'm not afraid. Zhang Yan glanced at Xiao Han and saw that he was putting on a strong front. He smiled mockingly and turned to Lu Mainyang, Demon King Lu, I'll have to trouble you to protect me outside the island. Lu Mainyang killed her daughter with her own hands, so her mind was a little unsettled. Hearing this, she nodded and said, Be careful, fellow Taoist. I'll be waiting 5 miles away. Seeing her leave, Xiao Han heaved a sigh of relief. He did not dare to ignore the pressure of a third-tier core transformation cultivator. Now that it was not in front of him, even though it was not far away, it gave him courage. He pointed at Zhang Yan and shouted coldly, "Zhang Yan, the heaven and earth's strange things belong to those who are virtuous. Back then, there was internal strife between you and your disciples. Thanks to the seniors of my family supporting the situation, we were able to turn the tide and not collapse. It can be seen that my family is the mainstay of Qinsong School. The 4 Marquises' water should be taken by me. It's not something you can covet. Even if you borrow someone else's hand to take it, it will still be overturned under the general situation. To tell you the truth, I have a Yuanying senior to protect me. If you know what's good for you, you'd better leave quickly. Otherwise, don't blame me for not showing mercy when the time comes." Although he said that he was disdainful of Zhang Yan used only one sword to sweep through the 6 rivers and 4 islands. Zhang Yan's ferocious reputation was known, so deep in his heart he was extremely afraid of him. He also cherished his life very much, so he really did not dare to make a move. Therefore, he planned to intimidate the other party with words, hoping to scare the other party away. Zhang Yan laughed coldly. He looked straight at Xiao Han and said, "I don't care what your name is, and I don't care where you come from. I only know that today, you and I are both here for the 4 Marquises' water. If you have the guts, then come and fight me to determine the winner and the loser." Both of his eyes were oppressive. After reaching the 2nd tier of the spirit comprehension contract, his body was covered in Wei-Li. Every word he spat out was like a clap of thunder. When he finished speaking, his voice shook the sea, causing rumbling echoes in all directions. Thousands of egrets flew up from behind him, as if they had gathered into a boundless tide. The momentum was extremely shocking. Xiao Han's face turned pale, and he unconsciously took a step back. Zhang Yan stared at him, took a step forward, and yelled in a low voice, "Xiao Han, I ask you, do you dare to fight me?" His clothes fluttered as he stepped forward. His battle intent surged, and adding on the fact that the ocean behind him seemed to be boiling, there was a natural pressure coming towards Xiao Han. Xiao Han was forced back by his aura, and he couldn't help but take a few steps back. He wanted to fight, but his chest seemed to be blocked by something. His mouth opened and closed, but he couldn't say a single word. For a direct disciple of a big family like him, his path was smooth from the moment he was born. His seniors would take care of everything for him, and he didn't need to worry about anything else. That was why he was able to improve and reach the 3rd level of the mystic light realm before the age of 25, which was why he was sent out to train. Even so, he had cultivators with high cultivation protecting him, and his experience in fighting others was limited to a few of his own race. If he could return to his race and successfully form his golden core, he wouldn't be afraid of fighting with Zhang Yan. However, he wasn't ready yet. Zhang Yan was different. He relied on himself to kill his way to where he was today. Compared to him, Xiao Han, who hadn't gone through any training, was weaker in both mind and will. Seeing him like this, Zhang Yan couldn't help but frown and yell, "My Wen family chose a few people to fight with me, and I thought they were all elites. But now that we meet again, how come you don't even have the courage to draw your sword? How are you worthy of being my opponent?" As soon as these words came out, Xiao Han was incomparably humiliated. He couldn't take it anymore and shouted, "Zhang Yan, do you think I'm afraid of you?" He shook his sleeve and took out a seal. This treasure floated in the air with the seal facing downwards. The talisman characters flowed on it, and just as it was about to let out a clear light flew out from between Zhang Yan's eyebrows and froze it in the air. Seeing this, Xiao Han couldn't help but be shocked and angry. He took a few steps back and put his hand behind his back. He took out a thin needle and thought, "Zhang Yan, do you think I can't deal with you?" With a flick of his finger, the needle flew out silently. It circled in the air and headed towards the back of Zhang Yan's head. This needle was called Een Crossing Dragon Beard Needle. The front part was as hard as metal, and the back part was as soft as cotton. When it flew, it was extremely fast. Once it entered the body, it would wander around and mess up the internal organs and acupoints. At that time, the opponent would be at his mercy. The sword orb between Zhang Yan's eyebrows seemed to have sensed danger and jumped forward on its own. A sword ray slashed down and hit the needle. However, the needle curved and bounced back, but it wasn't stopped. It still slipped under the sword and headed straight for Zhang Yan. Xiao Han couldn't help but be overjoyed. He didn't look at the result and formed a spell. A magic sword appeared in the air and he commanded it to slash down on Zhang Yan's head. At the same time, he shouted and a 7-colored cloud appeared on his head. In the bright light, a scorching yang fire was released. The fiery light was also burning towards Zhang Yan's body. Zhang Yan slightly squinted his eyes, his face showed a mocking expression. He tilted his head to one side. A thing sound was heard as the dragon beard needle bounced off his head. He raised his hand again and in a split second he caught the flying sword that was flying towards him. His 5 fingers slightly closed and the sword was broken, and he casually threw it at his feet. Seeing the mysterious light and the scorching yang fire coming over, he stretched out his hands and a beast-faced broadsword appeared in his hands. With a loud shout, he swung the broadsword downwards. The broadsword light was torn apart like silk. Then he stepped on the clouds and took large strides. Force, force. Xiao Han's expression changed. He didn't expect that the move that he had painstakingly planned would be broken in an instant. Seeing Zhang Yan coming with the broadsword like a tiger pouncing on its prey, his eyes couldn't help but reveal a frightened expression. For a moment, he froze on the spot. When Zhang Yan got close, his eyes flashed. He raised the broadsword and waved it. This broadsword was incomparably fast. Xiao Han subconsciously tilted his body, but the broadsword landed squarely on his shoulder. He staggered and fell to the ground. At this time, he came to his senses and knew that the situation wasn't good. He resisted the pain from his shoulder and rolled up his sleeves. He turned into a beam of light and escaped. Just now, Zhang Yan only felt that the broadsword was slightly sluggish. He thought that the opponent had the protection of the treasured clothing. He snorted coldly and urged his mind. 365 drops of serene in heavy water flew out from the top of his head. He pointed again and chased after Xiao Han. Xiao Han didn't fly more than 100 feet before he was blocked by a layer of smoke. He knew that it was Lu Meinyang's trick. His heart was filled with hatred. But before he could find another way out, the serene in heavy water that was chasing after him had already arrived. He suddenly felt as if his back was hit by a hammer. His vision went black and he fell from the sky with a cry. He fell to the ground and couldn't get up for a moment. He saw Zhang Yan striding over with a bone-chilling broadsword. He couldn't help but be scared out of his wits. He threatened, "Zhang Yan, I am a member of the Shao clan. If you kill me, aren't you afraid of the Shao clan's revenge?" Zhang Yan sneered. He raised the broadsword in his hand and swung it down. Wherever the broadsword passed, a head rolled down. Chapter 185. Since Xiao Han was killed on the spot, Zhang Yan naturally wouldn't let go of the remaining origin spirit's essence blood. He released the 9-absorption devil taming slip and absorbed it. After the sea breeze blew, Xiao Han's corpse and clothes turned into ashes, leaving only a treasured robe and a sleeve on the ground. Zhang Yan spread out his mystic light and swept the 2 items away. Then, he turned into a rainbow and flew out of the island. On the way, he called out to Lu Meinyang and returned to the Dragon Country ship. After entering the treasure pavilion, he sat on the jade couch and crossed his legs. He first took the treasured robe in his hand and looked at it carefully. After looking at it, he couldn't help but be surprised. The robe was originally purple, but now it had turned into a white robe. There was a pattern of latitude and longitude on the robe, and it was as smooth as water without a speck of dust. When he pinched it and released it, it returned to its original state without a single wrinkle. Zhang Yan remembered that he couldn't cut this treasured robe even with the beast-faced broadsword. Even when 365 drops of serene in heavy water crashed into it, Xiao Han was still injured but not killed. If a strength path cultivator wore this robe, their battle prowess would undoubtedly be greatly increased when they fought. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This item is suitable for me." He looked at it twice more and saw a line of small words on the sleeve. There were 4 lines written on it: 7-star sun-binding robe, burning in 100 smelting fires. Not being able to escape the tribulation of man is the most difficult. When Zhang Yan saw this, he knew that the previous owner of this item was reminding those who came later to not rely on this item to cause trouble, or else it would affect their own cultivation and lead to a tribulation. It seemed that this robe had some history. It might not have been owned by the Shao clan before. With the style of the Xianmen clans, why would they write such a sentence? He smiled and kept the treasured robe. Then he waved his hand and took out a sleeve. This sleeve was embroidered with stars. The rune lines were connected, and the pattern contained the mysteries of the stars. After Zhang Yan looked at it, he reached out his hand and pressed it. However, he was gently pushed away by a faintly discernible force and let out spiritual qi. He felt a wave of true sense faintly resisting him. He was overjoyed. He didn't expect that this sleeve pouch was actually a profound weapon. Profound artifacts were hard to come by. Even aristocratic families would not be able to take them out easily. This treasure was only given because Shao Han's talent was outstanding and he was able to reach the 3rd level of the mystic light realm before the age of 25. He wanted to undo his sleeves. He had to subdue this treasure no matter what. Thinking of this, he spouted several more wisps of spiritual energy. Sensing Zhang Yan's domineering spiritual energy, the wisp of true sense struggled a few times, and then, realizing that it couldn't resist, suddenly leaped into the air, as if it were about to flee. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "How can you escape?" He pointed. The sleeve couldn't help but tremble as it fell from the sky and returned to his hand. He was about to refine it with his spiritual energy. At this moment, footsteps could be heard coming from outside. He looked out from the restriction and saw Lu Mainyang standing outside the door. He waved his sleeve and opened the door. He stood up and greeted, "Demon King Lu, what brings you here? Please come in." Lu Mainyang entered the silent room. The two exchanged a few polite words before she sat down and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, I have a request this time." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Demon King Lu is too polite. If you have something to say, please say it. As long as it is within my capabilities, I will not refuse." From the moment Lu Mainyang blocked Shao Han, she was on his side. Apart from this, she had no other way out. From now on, she was on his side. Therefore, if it wasn't a big request, he wouldn't hesitate to help. Lu Mainyang sighed and said, "My unfilial child, Yan Rong, was my daughter after all. I want to bury her body. Previously, I sealed her meridians and stopped the primordial spirit powder. Now, I want to send her to the world. However, there aren't many people in the sea, so we can only go to the inner sea to find a good family. However, this trip will take several months. My little brother and junior sister Jing will have to unlock their shackles and it will fall on you." Zhang Yan saw the slight exhaustion in her beautiful eyes. He knew that even though she killed her own flesh and blood, she was still sad. He smiled and said, "So it's about this. Fellow Taoist, please rest assured. I will go and see Tao Jinren. But fellow Taoist, please don't be too sad, lest you hurt your cultivation." Lu Mainyang nodded and said, "Thank you for your help." She wiped the corner of her eyes, stood up and bowed before leaving. After sending Lu Mainyang off, the next 20 days were peaceful. Zhang Yan refined the sleeve pouch and the 7-star sun-binding robe every day. Every 3 to 5 days he would check on the progress of Guchu Air's technique. What surprised him was that even though Guchu Air's aptitude was not good, when she practiced the technique of Butian Pavilion, her progress was very fast. It seemed that she would soon find a jade elixir flower pond to open her meridians. He thought to himself, "I have been entrusted with a task, so I have to do it. Senior Pu Yuzi gave me the mountain river diagram that day, so I should find a good place to return it to his disciple. I can't do it half-heartedly. It seems that after this matter, I have to go to the flying boat immortal market of True Haiyu Temple." While he was thinking, he suddenly heard a rumbling sound from the opposite island. He unconsciously looked up and saw that halfway up the Black Mountain, there was a multicolored light shining down. It was like a stick stirring up the clouds, and the sound of beating drums could be heard. It was like thunder and lightning, one sound after another. Even people who didn't know the situation knew that something was breaking through the clouds. Zhang Yan took a look and laughed loudly. The time has come. He shook his robe and turned into a ray of light. He went to the bottom of the Black Mountain and took out a jade bottle that he had prepared earlier. He muttered something and then said, "Go!" This jade bottle received the order, and as if it had a mind of its own, it spat out the stopper. At this moment, the sound in the sky was getting louder and louder, and it was so loud that it made one's eardrums swell. In the end, a ray of lightning streaked across, and the multicolored clouds turned into a torrential downpour. At this moment, the rumbling sound of thunder finally arrived. Zhang Yan looked carefully. Amidst the rainwater, there were a few droplets of nectar-like rainwater flowing down. Without the slightest hesitation, he carefully moved the jade bottle forward and collected them drop by drop. This rain fell once every 60 years, and every time it would last for 6 hours. Moreover, the 4 seasons water was mixed in, and if one's eyesight was slightly bad, they would have missed it. Naturally, he did not dare to be careless. However, at this moment, there happened to be a group of people passing by in the sky. After hearing the thunder, they came over. This group of people exuded an evil aura. In front of them, dozens of people were carrying a flying sedan draped in red with embroidered balls hanging on both sides. Behind them, there were hundreds of male and female attendants, all wearing tall hats and standing on yellow talismans. Their faces were stiff and their skin was pale. At this moment, the curtain of the sedan was lifted, and a woman in colorful clothes could be vaguely seen sitting in it. Her eyes wandered and she looked out a few times. Then she waved at a girl. The girl walked up, and with her head lowered, she said, "Everyone, do you have any instructions? The spiritual chi here is very thick. There must be some kind of treasure being born for there to be an unusual phenomenon in the world." The girl glanced at the Dragon Country's ship and raised her chin. She pouted and said, "Go and find out which fellow cultivator is here. If it's a mediocre rogue cultivator, just kill him." The little girl answered and got off the cloud, but she was stopped by a ray of light before she could get far. A burly man seemed to have said something to her, and not long after, she turned around and said with her head lowered, "Everyone, I'm afraid that you're not here. These 2 people have a background. One is the eldest disciple of Tao Zhenren, Guolai, and the other seems to be a disciple of Qinsong school." Hearing that, the girl giggled and said, "Oh, they both have great backgrounds." They all had great backgrounds, and perfected Master Tao had always been protective of his own. This time, he's going to open a sect in the outer seas, and I'm going to attend the ceremony, so I can't not give him face. Qinsong school is even more powerful, and I heard that there are 10 grotto heavens guarding the mountain gate now. Even Shaoqing's sect will be suppressed by them. I can't afford to offend them, so I'd better leave as soon as possible. She took a deep look at Zhang Yan, and then put down the curtain of the sedan. The 46 sedan bearers stepped on the cloud, and in an instant, they disappeared without a trace. From the beginning to the end, Zhang Yan didn't even glance over. He just focused on receiving the 4 marquises' water. When 6 hours passed, the clouds and rain stopped, and the sun shone again, he let out a shout, rolled up his sleeve, and put away the jade bottle. Then, he turned into a streak of light and returned to the ship. However, as soon as he landed on the deck, Guolai, who was already standing there, glared at him and said, "You little brat, if I didn't stop those bastards for you, do you think you'd be so successful? You owe me again for this." Zhang Yan smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "Thank you, fellow Taoist. I didn't take a closer look just now. May I know where these people came from?" Guolai chuckled and said, "At this time, there is a sect in the southwest called the Corpse Cult, specializing in collecting the corpses of cultivators. This time, they probably heard about the appearance of the immortal mansion, so they came out to stir up trouble. If it wasn't for the fact that I haven't recovered from my injuries and lost my demon soul, with my temper, I would have long gone up and killed these people who are full of evil qi." Just as Zhang Yan was about to speak, he felt something and looked up at the sky, and said in surprise, "I've been here for more than a month, and I haven't seen a single person. Today it's lively." A few just left and there are more coming. In the distance, four cultivators flew over on lights, and there were men and women among them. One of them, a young cultivator wearing a scarf on his head, saw Dragon Country's ship and couldn't help but exclaim, and when he saw Gualai, he said in surprise, "Look, it's Martial Uncle Gua." This shout was loud, and Zhang Yan also heard it clearly, and said with a smile, "So it's fellow Taoist Gua's fellow disciples." However, when Gualai saw them, his expression became weird, and he muttered, "These bastard brats, what trouble did they get into now?" After the four saw Gualai, their flying lights sped up, and after a few breaths, they landed on the deck and bowed together. "Greetings, Martial Uncle." Zhang Yan looked at these people, and he was slightly surprised. Apart from the cultivator wearing the scarf who was at the second level of the Mystic Light Realm, the other three were all at the first level of the Mystic Light Realm. He heard that among the four disciples under Tao Jinren, apart from Gualai, who was a small golden core, the others were all golden core formation cultivators, and his disciples' cultivations weren't weak either. There weren't many Yuanying enlightened masters in Qinsong school who could teach their disciples like this. After the disciple with the scarf bowed, he shouted, "Martial Uncle, Shin Mingu of Chongyue True Temple detained senior brother Shin and said that he wants us to use a spirit crane to exchange for him. Martial Uncle, please help us." Gualai usually took care of the younger generation of disciples in the sect, and he had the same protective personality as Tao Jinren, so he was willing to help out if there was any trouble. However, when he heard this, he grinned. Although he liked to fight, he had just recovered from his injuries, and his beast essence soul was destroyed. How could he fight someone? He had heard of this Shinmingu's name before, and he was an expert among the younger generation of Chongyue True Temple. His yin-yang flying knife was also very strong, and even if he was at his peak, he wouldn't dare to say that he could win for sure, let alone now that he was half crippled. Seeing these people staring at him, Gualai felt a headache coming on. He patted his head and suddenly remembered something. He pointed at Zhang Yan and said, "You guys, find him." Chapter 186. Everyone has their own thoughts. After he spoke these words, Gualai seemed to be extremely impatient, and he waved his hand and actually didn't even look back as he left these juniors behind before turning around and returning to the treasure pavilion. However, on the way back, he glanced at Zhang Yan intentionally or unintentionally. The four disciples looked at each other, not understanding what was going on. They turned back to look at Zhang Yan and saw that his cultivation was at most similar to their own, so they thought Gualai was joking. Zhang Yan found it funny. He didn't think that a person like Gualai, who looked like a straightforward person, would secretly give them a look. Thinking that Gualai had something to say, he said to the four people, "Fellow Taoists, this ship is very spacious. You can choose a secluded courtyard to stay in." Finishing his words, he also flew into the treasure pavilion. Sure enough, not long after, he saw Gualai waiting for him in front of a bright hall. When Gualai saw him, he glared at him and said without any trace of politeness, "Brother Zhang, I have something to ask of you this time. Don't shirk it." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Gua must be joking. You've helped me many times before, so you can tell me what it is. Is it for your juniors?" Hearing this, Gualai immediately became happy and said, "That's right. These juniors are the disciples of my second junior brother, Zhao Jingqing. You heard it just now, one of their fellow disciples was kidnapped and now they're begging me. As a senior of the sect, I can't turn a blind eye. It's just that I've lost the demon spirit and soul essence. If I were to fight Shin Mingu, I'm afraid I'd lose more than I win. Therefore, I'd like to ask brother to help me deal with this person. As long as brother agrees, then you'll be repaying the favor. When will the true moon leaf grass be refined into pill water, then you can return it to me." When Zhang Yan heard this, his interest was piqued. Gualai was a person who refused to admit defeat. If even he said that Shin Mingu was hard to deal with, then he must have some real ability. Zhang Yan asked, "What is Shin Mingu's cultivation level?" Gualai snickered and said, "The cultivation of that person named Shin isn't high. He's only at the third level of the Mystic Light Realm. But his talent is outstanding and he has practiced the Yin-Yang Li Origin Flying Dagger to a very high level. I've fought him a few times, And because both sides are wary of each other, we're in a stalemate. However, I can see that this person is very skilled. Even if old Gui uses his true strength, he might not be able to beat him. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered as he gently smiled and said, since fellow Taoist has said so, it is obvious that this fellow Taoist Shin is an extremely powerful person. Now that he has told me the truth, aren't you afraid that I will beat a retreat? Guo Lai laughed loudly and looked at him meaningfully. He said, old brother Zhang, there is no need to be humble. I know your abilities. Even if you can't beat that person, you can still protect yourself. He had fought with Zhang Yan that day, so he knew that even if he hadn't fainted from exhaustion, he would most likely have lost. Most importantly, Zhang Yan was a sword cultivator. The strength of sword cultivators wasn't that their swords were sharp, but that they were fast. Even if they couldn't beat their opponent, they could leave as they pleased, and no one would be able to stop them. Furthermore, Xiao Mu had mysteriously disappeared that day, and Zhang Yan hadn't told him what happened in the end. Guo Lai also understood that Xiao Mu hadn't been able to gain the upper hand. He guessed that Zhang Yan still had some hidden tricks up his sleeves, so he was very confident in him. Zhang Yan pondered for a while and said, all right, I agree to this matter. However, with regards to the restrictions on fellow Taoist Lu and Demon King Jing, I will have to trouble you to deal with them when we meet Tao Zhenren. Seeing that Zhang Yan had agreed, Guo Lai heaved a sigh of relief. He patted his chest and said, as long as you seek justice for my juniors and save my martial nephew Shen, I will take care of this matter. Zhang Yan nodded. Although Guo Lai was a straightforward person, he took his promises very seriously. It could be seen from the fact that he still had the guts to come back after being chased away by Xiao Mu. The two talked for a while more before Zhang Yan said goodbye to Guo Lai and walked out the door. At this moment, there was no trace of anyone on the deck, so they must have entered the treasure pavilion. He withdrew a restriction talisman from his sleeve and inspected it silently. He knew that the four of them had entered the second level of the treasure pavilion, and they'd stopped at a courtyard in the southeast. Just as he was about to head over there, his expression changed and he stopped moving. He saw a ray of light flying over. When it saw him, it turned around and landed on the spot. It was the young cultivator with the square scarf on his head. He took a few steps forward and cupped his hands at Zhang Yan with a smile. He said, I was just about to look for fellow Taoist. I am Dai Huan, may I know your name? Zhang Yan cupped his hands in return and said, I am Zhang Yan. Dai Huan said, oh, but after thinking for a while, he hadn't heard of this name. However, he maintained his smile and said, it's an honor to meet you. After a pause, he cautiously asked, may I know, how do I address fellow Taoist Zhang and my martial uncle Guo? Zhang Yan waved his hand and said with a smile, fellow Taoist Guo and I are just acquaintances. We are just friends, there's no need to talk about seniority. Dai Huan's expression relaxed and became much more natural than before. Obviously, he saw that Zhang Yan's age and cultivation were not much different from his own, so he didn't want to treat him like an elder. When he heard this, he straightened his body and said, just now, martial uncle Guo asked fellow Taoist to help us, but I wonder if fellow Taoist has heard of Shinmingu? Zhang Yan shook his head and said with a smile, before meeting you, I have never heard of this person. Dai Huan was startled and frowned. He said, if that's the case, fellow Taoist must not know that Shinmingu was once chased by a monster king for several days, but he still managed to escape? Zhang Yan said frankly, indeed, I don't know. Dai Huan glanced at Zhang Yan and saw that his expression didn't change at all after hearing this. He didn't know whether it was because he really had the ability and didn't take it to heart, or because he didn't know the power of a monster king. Could this person really compete with Shinmingu? Dai Huan was deeply suspicious in his heart. He was also asked by a few senior and junior brothers and sisters to test Zhang Yan's background, but Zhang Yan gave him a feeling that he couldn't see through. After hesitating for a moment, he said, my junior brother Shin is now detained on Anong Island, and I don't know what kind of torture he's suffering. Our hearts are burning with anxiety. May I know when fellow Taoist Zhang will set off to rescue him? Anong Island, I know this place. Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, this time I'm going to the D's celestial market of Chonghuezhen Temple. It's on the way, so I'll take the flying boat there later and solve this matter on the way. Hearing his arrogant tone, Dai Huan was even more unwilling to believe it. He also didn't have the mood to continue chatting. After saying a few polite words, he hurriedly bid farewell and went to the backyard. Zhang Yan looked at his back and thought, although this Dai Huan's cultivation is similar to mine, he isn't a person with a firm will. He doesn't have the fierce fighting and killing aura of senior brother Ning. It's obvious that he hasn't been tempered enough. I heard that Tao Zhenren was born as an abandoned child. When he was young, he used to beg on the road. Later, he got the chance to become an immortal and entered the mountain gate of Nanhua sect. He isn't from a Xianmen aristocratic family, but the method he used to teach these third-generation disciples is the way of an aristocratic family. If a Xianmen aristocratic family trained disciples, they would choose people with good aptitudes from within the sect. Then, they would be given cultivation methods, elixirs, immortals' cave celestial devices, and put in all their effort to train them. When their cultivation had reached a certain level, they would slowly be let out to gain experience. Even so, they would be protected by cultivators with profound cultivation to ensure that they wouldn't easily lose their lives. However, it was different for the line of master and disciple. Although they would choose disciples widely, except for a few disciples who had a solid foundation, the rest would only give you pointers on the essentials and wouldn't care about you on normal days. Whether you could succeed or not depended on your own fate and temperament. This method was like a big wave washing the sand. Therefore, the cultivators who could really fight their way out in this kind of environment were not simple. They were all people with a firm heart and extraordinary willpower. Therefore, below the core transformation cultivators in Qinsong School, those with high cultivation were mostly disciples of Xianmen aristocratic families. The line of master and disciple, on the other hand, had a lower cultivation level and fewer people. However, most of them were powerful figures, such as Ning Chongxian and Luo Qingyu. In the beginning, they were no different from Zhang Yan. They didn't have any teachers to deliberately look after them. They fought with all their might and finally stood out among their fellow apprentices. While Zhang Yan was walking, he suddenly heard the sound of thunder in the air. He saw a ferocious python scuttling in and rolling 3 times in front of him. When it stood up, it was a hideous-looking man dressed in armor. When he saw Zhang Yan, he hurriedly kowtowed and said, "Thank you, master, for enlightening this lowly one." This lowly one was able to gain sentience and shed off this layer of evil skin. This lowly one is no longer muddle-headed. I hope that master can accept this lowly one and let this lowly one serve you. This monster was the monster python that Zhang Yan threw the form transformation pill at that day. Today, it happened to transform and used the restrictions on the flying boat to avoid the lightning tribulation. It was so grateful that it shed tears. Zhang Yan chuckled and said, "It's not easy for you to be grateful. Since you're willing to follow me, I'll give you a name." He thought about it and said gently, "Zhang Pan, what do you think?" The monster was overjoyed. He bowed again and said loudly, "Thank you, master, for giving me a name." When Dai Huan returned to the courtyard with a frown, a few people from the same sect surrounded him. A bulky male disciple asked hurriedly, "Senior martial brother, how was it? Did you find out anything?" Dai Huan raised his head and looked at them. He fell silent for a while before saying, "Although I can't tell how strong that fellow Taoist is, he's only at the mystic light realm. Even if he's a bit stronger than us." He smiled bitterly and shook his head. "The 4 of us together might not be a match for Shinmingu. What can he do by himself?" Another disciple curled his lips and said, "I told you long ago that Martial Uncle Guo always does whatever he wants. He just said it casually, so how can we believe him?" Dai Huan glanced at him and said unhappily, "Junior martial brother, how can you talk bad about master behind his back? Don't do it again." The disciple quickly lowered his head and didn't dare to say anything. Among these people, there was a female wearing a bright feather robe. She was very meticulous and thought, "When we were on the deck, I saw that Martial Uncle Guo was injured and couldn't fight. He probably didn't want to say it because he wanted to save face, so he used that fellow Taoist as a shield. I think that fellow Taoist's cultivation isn't weak, but to fight with that Shinmingu. She shook her head and obviously didn't think well of Zhang Yan. She thought for a while and said, "Senior Marshal Brother Dai, can you listen to Junior Marshal Sister?" Dai Huan never dared to underestimate this Junior Marshal Sister, so he looked at her and said, "Junior Marshal Sister Wei, please speak." Junior Marshal Sister Wei smiled and said, "Since Senior Marshal Brother wants me to speak, I'll speak. We originally came to find Senior Marshal Brother D to seek justice for us, and bumping into Marshal Uncle Guo was a pleasant surprise. Since he didn't want to do it himself and only ordered that fellow Taoist to help, I think he must have his reasons. As juniors, we don't need to think too much about it and just do as he said. But we also need to leave a way out. Why don't we send out a talisman first? If Senior Marshal Brother D is nearby, he will definitely come here in 2 or 3 days. At that time, he will stand up for us and we won't need to trouble that fellow Taoist." Hearing this, Dai Huan nodded repeatedly and said, "Junior Marshal Sister Wei is right. That fellow Taoist doesn't know how powerful Shen Minggu is. Even Marshal Uncle Guo couldn't beat him. If he went up, he would just be throwing his life away in vain. Let me go and discuss with him. We'll wait here for a few days. If Senior Marshal Brother Fu really doesn't come, it won't be too late to set off." Chapter 187. Clear Feather School. Although the Chi-Dragon ship was called an ocean ship, it was actually a magical artifact. After being refined by Zhang Yan, he would be able to know what anyone was doing on the ship with a single sweep of his mind. However, those with high cultivation levels would naturally be able to sense it, so he wouldn't cause any trouble. However, these people's cultivation was close to his, so they didn't take any precautions. It was equivalent to opening the door and letting him in. Naturally, he could hear everything they said clearly. After listening for a long time, he let out a carefree laugh. Guolai had asked him to help because he owed Guolai a favor. Furthermore, he had heard that Shen Minggu seemed to be an extraordinary person, so he had agreed to help Guolai. He wouldn't get any benefits himself, but if someone else helped him, that would be for the best, and he wouldn't have to stick his neck out. He thought to himself, "These people seem to trust that Senior Marshal Brother Fu very much. Since that's the case, I might as well wait for them for a few days. If that Senior Marshal Brother Fu arrives in time, I'll be able to answer to fellow Taoist Guo." After making up his mind, he closed the restriction and sat cross-legged on the jade couch, continuing to refine the sleeve pouch and the 7-star sun binding robe. After sending out the message, the 4 of them waited for 4 days. Every day, Dai Huan would send people out of the boat to take a look, but there was no sign of that Senior Marshal Brother Fu. Just as they were waiting anxiously, on the morning of the 5th day, a clear whistle came from the sky and a black dot was approaching from afar. A disciple happened to see it and couldn't help but be excited and shouted, "Senior Marshal Brother Dai, Senior Marshal Sister Wei, come out quickly, Senior Marshal Brother Fu is here." When Dai Huan and the others heard the voice, they all turned into beams of light and flew out of the treasure pavilion. When they landed on the deck, they saw a goshawk with a wingspan of 15 feet. Its eyes were like lightning, and it had black feathers and a golden beak. Standing on its back was a middle-aged cultivator with deep eyes and thin lips. This man was tall and thin, and his skin was dark. When he looked at them, there was a sharp aura that felt like a knife cutting through them. Dai Huan and the other 3 disciples bowed and said, "Greetings, Senior Marshal Brother Fu." Senior Brother Fu seemed to be serious in speech and manner, and when faced with the greetings of his fellow disciples, he only nodded in greeting. He swept his gaze around and said in a low voice, "Why did all of you urgently summon me with a talisman message? Where's Junior Brother Shin? How could he not be here? Did he cause trouble?" Dai Huan hurriedly said, "Senior Marshal Brother, you've misunderstood. We had a conflict with the disciples of Chongyue True Temple in the Flying Boat Immortal Market. Junior Marshal Brother Shen was captured by Shen Minggu. Shen Minggu even demanded him to release Shen Minggu. He wanted us to go to Tranquil Hong Island and exchange spiritual birds for mounts. At this point, his tone was filled with anger. Senior Marshal Brother Fu's eyes flickered as he muttered, "Shen Minggu, huh?" Ancestral Master's prediction was right. When we established our sect in the outer Endless Sea, This Chongyue true temple really couldn't help but jump out. At this moment, a gust of sea breeze blew over, causing everyone's clothes to flutter. Dai Huan unintentionally glanced at it, and her eyes narrowed as she exclaimed, "Senior Brother Fu, what happened to your right arm?" Everyone looked up and exclaimed as well. This senior martial brother Fu's right sleeve was empty, and it was obvious that he was missing an arm. However, he acted as if nothing had happened and said, "When I was chasing after that demonic crane, my arm was pecked off by it. I've already applied medicinal pills on my severed arm and kept it. I'll just reattach it later. There's no need for all of you to make a fuss about nothing." Dai Huan and the others all heaved a sigh of relief. Those who cultivated qi in the mystic sect had their bodies as their foundation. It was fine if they were injured, but if they were missing an arm or a leg, it would be difficult for them to attain the great Tao in the future. Although this senior martial brother Fu was of the same generation as them in name, in reality, he was personally taught mystical techniques by Tao Zhenren. No matter if it was cultivation or Tao techniques, he was much stronger than them, the third-generation disciples. Moreover, he had the highest hope of condensing an inner core within these 20 years. There was even a rumor in the sect that he was the true successor of ancestral master Tao Zhenren. Senior martial brother Fu looked around and said, "I'll go rescue junior martial brother Shen. However, who owns this flying boat? Why are all of you here?" Dai Huan hurriedly said, "This flying boat belongs to a good friend of senior martial Uncle Gua. We just happened to come across it. Senior martial Uncle Gua is currently cultivating in the quiet room. Does senior martial brother want to go and meet him?" Hearing Gualai's name, senior martial brother Fu frowned slightly and said, "I won't disturb senior martial Uncle Gua's cultivation. However, since you've met senior martial Uncle Gua, why didn't you ask for his help?" Dai Huan and the senior martial sister at the side looked at each other and said in a low voice, "I've also told senior martial uncle about this. However, senior martial uncle seems to be in a difficult position. Originally, he wanted to ask his good friend to help him. Now that senior martial brother is here, there's no need to trouble this fellow Taoist." Hearing this, senior martial brother Fu suddenly shouted and said, "I'm Fu Yuqing. May I invite fellow Taoist to come out and meet me?" After saying that, he waved his hand and a snowflake-like white profound light flew out from his hand and flew towards the top of the treasure pavilion. However, before it could touch the restriction, a profound light of gold and fire flew out and intertwined with the white profound light, grinding it away. At the same time, a calm voice came out from the treasure pavilion. "Fellow Taoist Fu is here as a guest. If you're interested, you can stay on this boat for a few days. I'm refining a magic treasure, so it's not convenient for me to come out and meet you." Senior martial brother Fu frowned slightly and said in a low voice, "Is senior martial Uncle Gua asking this person to rescue junior martial brother Shin on his behalf?" Dai Huan nodded and said, "That's right." Senior martial brother Fu closed his eyes and then opened them again. He nodded slowly and said, "Senior martial Uncle Gua's discerning eyes are correct." Dai Huan said in surprise, "Oh, senior martial brother, what's so special about this person?" Senior martial brother Fu let out a cold laugh and didn't say much to them. People like him had been through the tempering of battle formations for a long time and didn't need to meet. He only needed to identify his opponent's spiritual aura to know the rough situation and whether he could deal with him or not. However, after seeing that domineering profound light, he couldn't tell the depth of it. How could the other party be someone ordinary? He said in a low voice, "Even though the person senior martial Uncle Gua invited is not weak, this matter has been handled wrongly. This is a matter of our clear feather sect, so how can we let others handle it?" The four people present nodded. Only this senior martial brother Fu could reply to Gualai's intentions, and he was standing on the side of reason. If it were anyone else who said such things about their elders, Dai Huan would definitely stand out and reprimand them. Dai Huan noticed that senior martial brother Fu said the three words, "Clear feather sect," and he couldn't help but say with a trembling voice, "Clear feather sect. Could it be the sect master patriarch?" He was so excited that he couldn't speak coherently. The others also came to their senses and looked at senior martial brother Fu with burning gazes. Clear Feather Sect was the name of the sect that Tao Zhenhong had decided on. Previously, when he had established the sect, he had taken care of the disciples and told them not to say the name of the sect even in private. But now, Senior Marshal Brother Fu had said it openly, unless he had obtained Tao Zhenhong's approval. Senior Marshal Brother Fu looked around and said solemnly, "Junior Marshal Brothers, the Patriarch has already set the opening day of the sect on January 1st. From now on, when we travel outside, we can call ourselves Clear Feather Sect's disciples. I hope that Junior Marshal Brothers will work together and not bring shame to our sect's name." Hearing this, the faces of the 4 disciples, including Dai Huan, were filled with excitement, and they all agreed loudly in unison. Previously, although they had cultivation, they always felt that they were rootless duckweeds that followed the Patriarch around all day without a place to stand. Now that Tao Zhenren said the name, it was obvious that he had really made up his mind to protect this place. Senior Marshal Brother Fu looked at Dragon Country's big ship and said in a deep voice, "Junior Marshal Brothers and sisters, no matter how good this ship is, it belongs to someone else. Senior Marshal Uncle Gua is friends with the ship's owner, so he can stay here for a long time. How can you all stay here for long? Quickly pack up and follow me to save Junior Marshal Brother Shin." However, when he said this, Dai Huan and the others all looked troubled. Senior Marshal Brother Fu's face turned serious and he said, "What's wrong?" Dai Huan smiled bitterly and said, "Senior Marshal Brother, our spirit birds and mounts all died in Shinmingu's hands. Even if we want to leave with Senior Marshal Brother, we can't do anything about it." Senior Marshal Brother Fu was silent for a while and said, "That's because I didn't think it through." At this moment, there was a chirping sound in the air. A sharp-headed, red-beaked spirit pigeon flew over from nowhere and landed on his shoulder. Senior Marshal Brother Fu's expression didn't change. He took out a letter tube from the spirit pigeon's leg and casually opened the envelope. When he took out the letter paper and read it, his eyes gradually flickered and he said, "This Shinmingu is really powerful. 5 days ago, he defeated Nanhua Sect's disciple Qiuju, Taihao School's disciple Chujiao, and Pingyuan Sect's disciple Dan Huizhen. Good, very good. If I defeat this person and save Junior Marshal Brother Shin, I will definitely be able to raise the prestige of our Clear Feather Sect." Dai Huan saw that he seemed to have the intention to move right now, so she quickly persuaded, "Senior Marshal Brother Fu, please fix your arm first. It won't be too late to go after resting for a few days." Senior Marshal Brother Fu also knew that this would definitely be a tough battle and he couldn't be careless. After seriously considering it for a while, he nodded and took out an item from his sleeve and said, "Give this to the ship's owner." When Dai Huan saw that it was a talisman with a vermilion bird carved on it, she couldn't help but be shocked and said, "Senior Marshal Brother, isn't this the talisman that Master gave you? Why are you giving it to him?" Senior Marshal Brother Fu shouted in a deep voice, "I'm telling you to go, so go. Why do you need to ask so much?" Dai Huan had no choice but to take the talisman and turn into a long rainbow as she flew towards Zhang Yan. At this moment, in the treasure pavilion, Zhang Yan stood in front of the window and saw every movement of these people clearly. Now that he saw the situation, he knew that this Senior Marshal Brother Fu wanted to borrow his ship to temporarily stay for a few days to fix his broken arm. However, he had a proud and aloof personality and wasn't willing to ask for it, so he gave this item to Shun Lian to show that they didn't owe each other anything. Zhang Yan smiled and said to Gualai, who was standing at the side, "Fellow Taoist Gua, with you as my martial nephew, it seems that I don't need to do anything anymore." Gualai snorted and said, "Fu Yuqing is very quiet. Back then when Master picked him up, I already didn't like him. Although he has some skills, Master Gua doesn't think that he can win. If he can't win against that guy with the surname Shin, I still need you, Brother Zhang, to step in." Zhang Yan looked at Gualai in surprise and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Gua, do you have no confidence in your own martial nephew?" Gualai said, "If this kid successfully cultivated Master's Zhenwu fighting technique, I naturally have confidence. It's just that when this kid first cultivated Dao, he relied on his high aptitude and practiced 3 Dao techniques at the same time. He thought that he was invincible among his peers and was even proud of himself. Later, Master couldn't stand it anymore and gave him a few words of advice. Only then did he return to the right path, but he's still a dabbler. And this Shin Ming-gu from Chongyue True Temple has practiced the Yin Yang Li Yuan flying dagger since he was young. Along the way, he didn't have any distractions and has long practiced this set of techniques to the extreme. Unless he steps into the core transformation realm, he won't be able to improve any further. Therefore, in this battle, in my opinion, the odds are 6-4. Target equals _blank. Chapter 188. Target equals _blank. Chapter 49. Forcing with a blade. Hearing Guolai's words, Zhang Yan smiled and did not speak. Putting aside the truth of these words, he could hear a lot of jealousy in them. But thinking about it carefully, it was not without reason. Guolai claimed to have fought with Shin Ming many times, but they were all evenly matched. This Fu Yuqing was his martial nephew. If he won this time, wouldn't it show that he was useless? However, Zhang Yan also had his own plans. If Fu Yuqing were to be defeated, he would not hesitate to step forward and fight. Not only was the Chongyue True Temple the sharpening stone that he had chosen for himself, but he could also return the favor. Why not? At this time, Dai Huan rode on a light and arrived outside the treasure pavilion, looking at the vermilion bird token in his hand. He thought it was a pity. I'm just staying here for a few days to reattach my broken arm. Senior brother, why did you give this away? Giving it to someone else and not thinking of your own senior brother. He raised his head and saw a fierce-looking man guarding the door, looking like a servant. He was a third-generation disciple under Tao Zhenhong's tutelage, and he'd inherited the cultivation technique of the Southern Flower Sect. So he was naturally able to discern with a single glance that this person was a demon that had taken human form. So he immediately became blunt and shouted, "Where's your master?" Zhang Pan was startled and answered honestly, "He is in the yard." Dai Huan flicked his sleeves and was about to step inside when Zhang Pan hurriedly stopped him. "Honorable guest, please tell me why you are here so I can go in and report." Dai Huan already had a knot in his heart, and hearing this, he became even more unhappy, thinking, why did a little demon like you come to stop me? He snorted and secretly formed a technique, gathering qi in his eyes. Then he looked at Zhang Pan. This technique was passed down from Nanhua Sect's demon subduing technique. It was used to subdue demons. When Zhang Pan made eye contact with that gaze, he felt 2 rays of light penetrate into his mind, and for some reason, he fell to the ground in a daze. Dai Huan laughed mockingly and stepped inside. Who would have thought that she had only taken half a step when she heard a cold snort by her ear? She felt a tightness in her chest and couldn't help but take 2 steps back. Zhang Pan also seemed to wake up with this sound. Dai Huan couldn't help but be shocked. She raised her head and saw Guolai walking out with a gloomy expression, and she couldn't help but be slightly anxious in her heart. She braced herself and bowed. "Martial uncle." Guolai's expression was very ugly as he scolded, "Bastard brat, do you think your sect's methods are for you to bully people here? When you get back, use the saber-sharpening incantation 100 times. If you miss one, I'll punish you 10-fold. Dai Huan shuddered. Once the saber-sharpening incantation was activated, he would feel unbearable pain all over his body. It was a technique used by the sect to temper the disciples' willpower. Normally, 10 rounds would cause one to faint from the pain. Wouldn't 100 rounds be enough to kill him? However, he didn't dare to disobey. With a bitter expression, he said, "Yes, martial uncle." Guolai then cupped his hands towards the back and said, "Brother Zhang, for my sake, please spare him this once." It was impossible to tell whether Zhang Yan's voice was happy or angry as he said, "Fellow Taoist Dai, come in." Guolai fiercely glared at Dai Huan again and said, "You're on your own." Then he turned around and left. Dai Huan wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and walked into the courtyard. He saw Zhang Yan standing in front of the window with his back facing him, looking at something. He didn't know why, but he actually felt a little uneasy in his heart. He stepped forward and cupped his hands, saying, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, just now my sect's senior brother came. With him here, there's no need to trouble fellow Taoists this time. However, my senior brother still needs to borrow fellow Taoist's sea boat to recuperate for a few days, so he ordered me to deliver an item. I hope fellow Taoist will kindly accept it. Zhang Yan turned around. He took a look at the vermilion bird token and didn't stand on ceremony. With a wave of his hand, he put it away into his sleeve and said indifferently, I already understand fellow Taoist Fu's intention. You guys are also going the same way, so I can give you a ride. Fellow Taoist Dai, please go and tell him to recuperate well. Dai Huan secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't want to stay any longer, so he cupped his hands and left. Zhang Yan thought, this Zhang Pan will follow me from now on. If I'm not here, this sea boat will still need his care. It's just that his cultivation is too low and he can't even control the sea boat, so he can only do some manual work. Why don't I teach him a technique? I originally wanted to find an opportunity, but now is just the right time. Thinking of this, he called out, Zhang Pan, come in. Outside the door, Zhang Pan heard this and hurriedly walked in with his head lowered. There was some fear on his face as he said, Master. Zhang Yan interrupted him and said, listen carefully. If you don't want to be bullied in the future, then practice the technique I teach you. Listen carefully. Zhang Pan was startled at first, but then he was overjoyed. He hurriedly pricked up his ears and listened attentively, not daring to miss a single word. Zhang Yan's lips moved as he repeated the first half of the technique on the true scroll of the hornless dragon 5 times. Seeing that Zhang Pan had memorized it, he finally stopped and said, this technique can be considered a profound technique. Go back and practice it well. Whether you can master it or not will depend on your own luck. Zhang Pan hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed, crying, Zhang Pan, thanks, master. I can't repay the kindness of passing on this technique even with my life. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, practice by yourself. If you have any questions, come and ask me again. When he finished speaking, he turned into a ray of light and returned to the main pavilion. He sat on the jade chair and activated the talisman. The Dragon Country's ship rose into the air and flew towards Hong, an island. A few days later, a misty light appeared in his quiet room. After refining it for a long time, the 7-star sun-binding robe was completed. With a whistling sound, it flew out from the treasure light and turned into a black Taoist robe that spread out in the air. There were runes and lines on the robe, as well as the sun, moon, and stars, faintly hiding the workings of the heavens. After the robe floated for a while, it retracted its light and fell onto Zhang Yan's body, wrapping around him. Zhang Yan stretched his arms and legs and found that the robe fit him perfectly. Moreover, it looked the same as the Taoist robe he was wearing before. Even if Xiao Han were to come back to life, he wouldn't be able to see through it. He couldn't help but nod in satisfaction. With the protection of this treasured robe and his body that was stronger than steel, there was no one in the same generation who could hurt him. The ship traveled in the northwest direction for another 7 to 8 days. On this day, it was raining cats and dogs. Dai Huan and the others looked out from the restriction and saw that the sea was turbulent and the waves were towering. However, they were safe and sound here, without the slightest ripple. Dai Huan couldn't help but say enviously, Senior Marshal Brother Fu, we usually ride cranes and eagles in the wind and rain. Sometimes, we have to avoid the evil clouds as soon as we see them, lest we get sucked into them. But with this ship in hand, we don't have to worry about that. Senior Marshal Uncle Guo really has a good eye. I wonder how he got to know this fellow Taoist Zhang. Fu Yuqing snorted coldly and said, the founding master set the rule of riding spirit birds to cross the sea to train the disciples' temperament. We are just a temporary measure here. You must not be greedy for a moment of comfort and slack off. Dai Huan hurriedly said in a low voice, yes, Senior Marshal Brother. For hours later, when it was almost noon, the sky was finally clear and the clouds had dispersed. The sun was still shining brightly and they could see a few islands dotting the sea from afar. Junior Marshal Sister Wei, who was standing at the side, said, Senior Marshal Brother, there is someone blocking the way in front. Looking at their clothes, they must have reached the territory of Chongyue True Temple. Fu Yuqing nodded and said to Dai Huan, Junior Marshal Brother Dai, take my visitation card and go. Dai Huan replied, yes. He stood up and left the flying ship. This Chongyue True Temple occupied a sea province on the sea and also occupied more than 80 spiritual islands and scattered reefs. It had more than 1,000 disciples and was one of the big sects in the outer sea. This place was called Ox Horn Island, and it was one of the outermost islands. There were people on the island who had already noticed the ship, so they went forward to stop it. When they saw Dai Huan coming out, a conveyance light stopped in front of him and shouted, "Who are you? How dare you trespass on my Oxhorn Island?" Dai Huan took a closer look and saw that it was a young man in blue who had a pair of sharp eyes like an eagle. He carefully said, "I'm from Clear Feather Sect and I'm under the order of my senior martial brother Fu Yuqing to send a visitation card and wish to meet with fellow Taoist Shinmingu." This young man in blue had never heard of Clear Feather Sect, but he had heard of Fu Yuqing's name. He had a strange expression and took a look at the visitation card. He sneered in his heart. Looking at the handwriting, it was like a dragon and a snake, sharp and glaring, filled with murderous intent. How was this a visitation card? It was clearly a challenge card. When he thought of the rumors from the past 2 days, he instantly understood. He thought to himself, "I heard that senior martial brother Shin defeated 2 disciples from the big sects in a row and was praised by a few old fellows. If this goes on, he will overshadow me sooner or later. I heard that this Fu Yuqing is an outstanding talent among the 3 generations of disciples under Tao Jinhong. If I take him down, I will definitely be able to suppress his prestige. I've been looked down upon by those old fellows." The young man in blue rolled his eyes and waved at Dai Huan. He smiled and said, "Come with me." Dai Huan did not suspect anything and followed him. After walking for a short distance, the young man suddenly turned around and smiled at him. He opened a wooden box in his hand and a black gas flew out from it. He did not know why, but when he was hit by the black gas, he felt dizzy and fainted. The young man grabbed his collar and laughed before flying toward Dragon Country's flying ship. When he got close, he threw Dai Huan onto the ship and pointed with his finger. A flying knife appeared out of nowhere and stuck to Dai Huan's throat. He shouted, "Which arrogant guy wants to fight with my senior martial brother Shin?" A rainbow light flew out and Fu Yuqing landed in front of him. He said with a livid expression, "It's me. Who are you and why are you holding my junior martial brother hostage?" The young man in blue laughed and said, "Listen well, I'm Su Qiuo, a true disciple of Chongyue True Temple. I heard that you, Fu Yuqing, want to meet my senior martial brother Shin, so I came here. If you can defeat me, it won't be too late to meet him." Fu Yuqing's expression changed and his expression became serious. He said, "You're Su Qiuo?" Su Qiuo saw that Fu Yuqing seemed to have heard of him and immediately became happy. He said, "Not bad, not bad. It's me." Fu Yuqing said with a sullen expression, "Although I also want to meet you, my junior martial brother is in Shinmingu's hands. If you can make the decision, why can't I fight you?" Su Qiuo laughed and waved his hand. He said, "Don't talk nonsense. Today, you have to fight whether you want to or not. Otherwise, I'll kill your fellow disciple." He pointed with his finger and the flying knife instantly cut into half of Dai Huan's neck. Blood instantly flowed. Chapter 189. Target equals _blank. Chapter 50. Hoarding rare goods. When Fu Yuqing saw Su Qiuo suddenly making a move, he was both shocked and angered, and he shouted, "Stop!" Senior Marshal Sister Wei and the others who followed behind him also exclaimed, and their faces were filled with anger. But Su Qiuo didn't put away his saber. He crossed his arms and said with a smile, "If you can defeat me, I will let him go, but if you can't defeat me, you will be my defeated opponent. What use do I have for him?" Fu Yuqing stared at him and said heavily, "Fine. Don't involve others in our battle. Life and death will be up to fate." Su Qiuo chuckled and didn't say anything. His body trembled, and a white light flew out from his back, aiming straight for Fu Yuqing's head. When he looked closely, he realized that this white light was actually a white saber that seemed to have solidified. Fu Yuqing took a step back and just happened to avoid the sharp edge. He shouted in a low voice, and a ball of mysterious light rose from his back, condensing into a large yellow hand. It slapped the saber with its fingers, and with a muffled sound, the saber was smashed into a ball of dissipating essence chi. But before he could counterattack, Su Qiuo pointed with his hand, and another saber came down. Fu Yuqing had fought with the disciples of Chongyue True Temple before, so he didn't panic. With a calm expression, he controlled the large hand, and with the back of his hand, he blocked the flying saber, preventing it from coming down. While he was doing this, Su Qiuo didn't stay idle either. He formed an incantation, and the ball of white qi that had dissipated earlier spun on the spot, condensing into a white saber again, and slashed down again. But that wasn't the end. From all directions in the sky, flying sabers appeared one after another. There were a total of 7 flying sabers, and they danced around Fu Yuqing like snowflakes. Fu Yuqing shouted loudly, and the muddy yellow hand expanded out of thin air. It blocked left and right, and all the flying daggers were blocked outside the circle of light. When Su Qiuo arrived, Zhang Yan was also alarmed, but he didn't go out, and just watched coldly from the side. He carefully inspected the cultivation techniques of the two, and from the looks of it, Fu Yuqing and Guolai's cultivation techniques were very different. However, although Guolai was the eldest disciple of Tao Xinren, he cultivated the cultivation technique of the Southern Flower sect. It was said that after Tao Xinren broke out of the sect, he obtained immortal fate, and that mystic light hand was probably the Dao technique he learned later on. On the other hand, Su Qiuo's attack was like a torrential storm, wide and unrestrained. It was completely different from Bei Gonghao's sinister and vicious style. Moreover, Bei Gonghao had only mastered 5 flying daggers, but this person had used 7. Who knew what other tricks he had up his sleeve? Zhang Yan pondered for a moment, then took out a smooth jade from his sleeve and called out, "Is fellow Taoist Bei Gong here?" Hearing his voice, a wisp of Yuan's spirit floated up from the jade. However, Bei Gongbo was a cultivator at the 3rd rank of the mystic light realm after all, so much time had passed. After Lai Yi and Bei Gonghao looked in that direction and smiled bitterly. "Brother, how did you offend this brat?" Bei Gonghao looked in that direction and he smiled bitterly. "Brother, how did you offend this brat?" Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. "Could it be that this person has some background?" Bei Gonghao spoke hesitantly. "This person is the grandson of our Chongyuezhen Temple's sect master. His father is an elder of the demon sect. This kid's cultivation is not weak, but that's not all. I've heard that he has a powerful magical treasure, and his enemies often die mysteriously. It's just that no one has ever seen it. Although he's using the Liyuan flying dagger to fight, it's not his true skill." When Zhang Yan heard this, the words, "rare goods," appeared in his mind. His eyes flashed and he smiled. Since this person has such a background, he must have a lot of Renkue water essence on him? Bei Gonghao was startled, and he thought for a while before nodding slowly. He said with certainty, "Of course, I have a lot. To be honest, although I am an elder, I am not as good as the sect master's family. Take the yin-yang origin leaving flying saber for example. We need to use it with mist, and the number of saber strikes we can practice is much lower than theirs." Zhang Yan laughed and said, "Originally, I wanted to use the spirit shell to go to the celestial market to buy the Renkue water essence chi. Now that this person is here, why do I need to go far away? As long as I capture this person, what's there to worry about?" Bei Gonghao thought for a while. The most outstanding disciples of Chongyue True Temple were the 2 surnames Shin and Su. They also relied on these 2 families to control the other families and support the entire sect. This Su Qiuo's identity was not simple. If Zhang Yan proposed to exchange the Renkue water essence for Su Qiuo, this matter would most likely succeed. He secretly smiled bitterly. But next, he would also have to face the thunderous revenge of Chongyue True Temple, right? He could only hope that Su Qiuo could escape this disaster, or else he would be buried with him. At this moment, the 2 of them had been fighting for no less than half an hour. During this period, Su Qiuo had been the main attacker, and Fu Yuqing had been passively defending. Although Su Qiuo's face was carefree, and there was not the slightest trace of anxiety, he knew that he was also forced into a difficult situation. Although the 7 flying sabers were sharp, they could not penetrate his defense. Fu Yuqing had been suppressed for a long time, but he had been secretly accumulating strength. Once his momentum weakened, his counterattack would probably come like a blanket. However, his tactics did not stop here. He hooked the little finger of his left hand, and a trace of cunning appeared in his eyes. A black saber silently appeared behind Fu Yuqing, and it slashed down towards the side of his back that was completely unguarded. This was a Yin origin saber. The Yang saber of the origin Yin Yang flying saber walked on the righteous path, whereas the Yin saber walked on the devious path. They were like the art of war, but it was impossible to achieve the reversal of Yin and Yang until one's core was formed, and it lacked a type of variation. However, ordinary cultivators were usually unable to resist such an attack. When this saber silently slashed over, Fu Yuqing seemed as if he was completely unaware, and he still utilized the enormous hand made of dark light to deal with the 7 Yang sabers that ceaselessly slashed down before him. Right when he was about to perish beneath the saber, a clear cry sounded out, and then a demonic crane that was an entire 6 m tall appeared by his side. It flapped its wings and slapped the black saber into pieces, causing it to transform into a strand of black chi that drifted away. The corners of Fu Yuqing's mouth puckered. After he cultivated the Sky-Earth Dragon capturing palm, he was practically fearless when facing an enemy head-on. But when he fought another, he noticed that his side of his back had always been an extremely huge flaw, and if he didn't repair it, it would sooner or later become a flaw. Because of this, he'd walked through many desolate places, and not long ago he'd paid the price of losing an arm to capture this demonic crane and use it to guard the flaw on his side of his back. At this moment, he was only at the profound light realm, and he didn't have any flaws. Moreover, he hadn't controlled this demonic crane for a long time, so he wasn't able to control it as he pleased. One day, when he completely subdued it, he would be able to attack and defend at will, and it would be completely different from before. This was the source of his confidence in going against Shen Minggu. Fu Yuqing's face was expressionless as he fought steadily and dealt with every move that came his way. He knew that he didn't have to be greedy for quick victory, and he only had to defend steadily. Once Su Qiuo's strength was exhausted, it would be the time for him to counterattack. After successively slashing over 100 times, Su Qiuo noticed that he was still unable to defeat his opponent, and he felt anxious in his heart. This Fu Yuqing really does have some ability. I'll lose for sure once he's free. Looks like I have to use that treasure in the end to decide the outcome of the battle. However, not a single one of the people here can be left alive. He snorted and suddenly jumped out of the circle. He took out a wooden box, and with a flick of his thumb, he opened the cover. A black aura that was as black as ink flew out, and he pointed his finger downwards. This black aura headed straight for Fu Yuqing. Fu Yuqing was already on guard when he saw Su Qiuo's movement. Now that he saw it, he calmly threw out the demon-subduing circle, and with a long cry, the ink feather eagle appeared under his feet. The eagle was a mutated species, so its speed was extremely fast. With a flap of its wings, it was able to bring Su Qiuo dozens of feet away. However, the black aura followed him, and no matter where he flew to, it was like a ghost that wouldn't leave. He couldn't shake it off. When Su Qiuo saw this, his eyelids twitched. This was also the first time he saw someone actually able to dodge his transcendent artifact. Seeing that Fu Yuqing was being chased by the black aura, Su Qiuo used his origin-flowing flying daggers to intercept him from the front and back, but because the distance was too far, he couldn't reach Fu Yuqing. He instantly gnashed his teeth, and wanted nothing more than to bite Fu Yuqing to death. This Fu Yuqing was also a disciple personally taught by Tao Zhenhong, and the spirit bird under his feet was meant to deal with the peerlessly fast sword escape of sword cultivators, so how could Su Qiuo's flying daggers catch up to him? Su Qiuo's eyes darted around a few times, and he immediately came up with a plan. He suddenly shouted, "Fu Yuqing, you can slowly escape. Let's see how many of your fellow disciples can dodge my flying daggers." After saying that, he flicked his finger, and the dagger flashed. Blood burst forth, and Dai Huan's head was instantly chopped off. Another 7 white daggers flew up and slashed at the other 3 people. Senior Sister Wei and the others had weaker cultivations, and they knew that they had no chance of winning, so they hurriedly turned into rays of light and flew straight toward the treasure pavilion, hoping to rely on the restrictions to avoid these flying daggers. When Fu Yuqing saw Dai Huan die in front of him, he instantly became so furious that his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He let out a furious roar, and the movement of his spirit eagle couldn't help but pause for a moment. He was only delayed for a moment, and the black aura flew up and wrapped around his face. He only felt his mind become dizzy, and his body swayed before he fell off the spirit eagle's back. When Su Qiuo saw this, he couldn't help but be overjoyed. He abandoned Senior Sister Wei and the others, and drove his flying daggers to take Fu Yuqing's head. However, right at this moment, 7 bright sword rays shot out from the horizontal, and every single one of them accurately slashed at the flying daggers, causing them to transform into a ball of essence at almost the same time. Su Qiuo was caught unprepared by the sudden change, and just as he was about to make a hand seal to gather these flying daggers, he was caught off guard by another sword ray. This time, his expression changed, and he raised his hand to slap out a small black flag to block in front of him. However, the moment this sword ray was blocked, the air trembled, and another sword ray split off and slashed at him again. It actually didn't give him the slightest chance to catch his breath. At this critical moment, he let out a loud roar, and the Origin Li'in saber flew out from an unknown place to slash at this sword ray, blocking it. However, to his horror, this sword pellet trembled, and suddenly, another sword ray split off and came for him. In a hurry, he couldn't care about anything else, and he only had time to use the wooden box in his hand to block in front of him. With a crack, the wooden box that contained the black chi was actually slashed into 2, and the sword's momentum didn't stop there. It continued to descend, and with a chi sound, it split open a wound from his shoulder to his chest on his upper body. Fresh blood gushed out like a fountain, and he also let out a miserable cry before falling down. A flight light flashed by, and he was enveloped in it. Then, it landed in the treasure pavilion. Zhang Yan revealed himself, and he threw the half-dead Su Qiuo on the ground. With a wave of his sleeve, a few golden talisman flew out and stuck to his forehead, for limbs and navel, sealing his halogen sea of qi. Zhang Yan shook both of his sleeves, and he looked down from above. With a slight smile, he said, "With you in my hands, there's no need to go forward. I can just sit and wait for that Shenming to come." Chapter 190. Target equals _blank. Chapter 51. Parry Li Go Shen Feng. After Zhang Yan subdued Su Qiuo, he took his sleeve bag and searched it carefully. Just as he expected, this person had a lot of Rin Kuei water essence on him. It filled up a small bottle. There were at least 100 drops, which made him very happy. He thought to himself, this Su Qiuo is only an outer disciple of the Su clan, yet he has so much water essence on him. That Shen Minggu is even more famous, and he is a member of the Shen clan, so he must have more water essence on him than Su Qiuo. Although he had planned to go to the flying boat celestial market to buy the water essence, he didn't have much hope. One must know that this object was used by Chongyu Zhenguan to cast the yin-yang flying dagger of Liyuan. Even if they sold it, it could be assumed that there wouldn't be much of it. Compared to the amount he needed, it would be a drop in the bucket. Perhaps it would be better to directly plunder the Shin and Su families. Once he had collected enough of the water essence of the 9 Kuei, he could begin to cultivate the water element true light of the Taishan true light. Although he did not know how powerful it was, the Taishan sect was an ancient Shenmen sect, so this method should not be simple. While Zhang Yan was deep in thought, Su Qiuo also slowly woke up. He had been injured by Zhang Yan's sword, and his injuries were quite severe. Luckily, he was a mystic light realm cultivator, and as long as the spirit qi in his chest didn't scatter and he didn't lose any energy, he would be able to recover after taking some spirit medicine. But now that Zhang Yan had used a talisman to seal his meridians, he was unable to move. He could only lie there and force himself to speak. "Fellow Taoist, I've observed your technique, and it doesn't seem to be the same as Tao Jinhong's. Why do you have to make things difficult for me? If you're willing to let me go, I'll naturally reward you." Zhang Yan was sitting on the couch. Hearing this, he looked down and smiled. "What benefits do you have for me?" Su Qiuo had just killed Dai Huan, so he was extremely afraid that Zhang Yan would make him pay for it with his life. Seeing that Zhang Yan's tone seemed to be open to negotiation, he hurriedly said, "The rare treasures of the outer endless sea, celestial birds and spiritual beasts, cultivation methods and spirit pills, as long as you can name them, I will find a way to get them for you." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and said, "If I want 1,000 drops of 9th Kuei water essence from your sect, would you be willing to give it to me?" Su Qiuo was startled for a moment. Then he said in an extremely heroic voice, "1,000 drops of water essence is nothing. As long as you let me go, I'm willing to give you 3,000 drops of water essence." As soon as he said this, Zhang Yan was really shocked. He looked at Su Qiuo and saw that he didn't seem to be joking. He narrowed his eyes and said, "All right, write a letter and I will ask someone to send it to Chongyuezhen Temple. I will give you 3,000 drops of water essence as ransom. What do you think?" Su Qiuo was originally nervous, but when he heard this, his face lit up with joy, as if he was afraid that Zhang Yan would go back on his word. He hurriedly agreed, then with a bitter face, he said, "Also, please forgive me and help me treat my injuries." Zhang Yan smiled and with a wave of his hand, he took away the talisman on Su Qiuo's right arm. With a flip of his palm, he helped Su Qiuo to sit up. He took out a brush and ink from his sleeve and handed it to him. Then he took out a bottle of pills and said, "This is a pill for external application. Apply it on your injuries." Although Su Qiuo came out with an empty hand and could easily take down the talisman, under Zhang Yan's eyes, he didn't dare to make any unnecessary movements. He slowly applied the medicine on his body. He felt a cool sensation coming from his injuries. The pain he was feeling instantly disappeared, and the wounds immediately scabbed and closed. He saw that the medicinal effect of the medicinal pill Zhang Yan took out was extraordinary, and it was extremely rare. If Zhang Yan wanted to kill him, then there was no need for such a medicinal pill. His heart couldn't help but calm down, and he took out a brush and ink. Not long after, he wrote a letter. He picked up the letter and said, "Fellow Taoist, take this letter and send it to the nearby island. Someone will definitely come with the water essence in exchange for my return later." But in his heart he said, "After I escape, I'll come back and deal with all of you. Won't I still be able to get back what I gave you?" Zhang Yan took the letter and read it carefully. The words were short and there were only a few sentences. Obviously there was no trick. He looked at Su Qiuo and thought, what a pity. If this person didn't kill Dai Huan, I could make the decision to exchange him. But I can't do it now. Otherwise, how can I speak for fellow Taoist Lu and Jing in front of Tao Jinren? But with this person in hand, after I send this letter, I can lure Shen Minggu over and capture him. I believe I can get the water essence in my hands. As for the revenge of Chongyue True Temple, he wasn't worried at all. With Tao Jinren's eldest disciple and his juniors here, and this matter was done on their behalf, it was impossible for Tao Jinren to just stand by and watch. He kept the letter and suddenly thought of something. He said, "Let me ask you, what is the black gas that you used to injure Fu Yuqing?" Su Qiuo's expression was unnatural. He said, "That was a treasure bestowed by my father. I only know that it's always successful against enemies and has no solution to injuring people. But its origin, I don't know." He really didn't know what this magic treasure was. It was just that his father had told him that anyone who saw the true appearance of this treasure had to be killed to avoid leaving behind any future troubles. But now that he had been captured, it was more important to save his life. He could only think of a way to escape first before he could think of anything else. At this time, on the other side of the treasure pavilion, Senior Marshal Sister Wei and the others were frowning. They fished the unconscious Fu Yuqing out of the sea and tried all kinds of methods, but they couldn't wake him up. In the end, they brought him to Guolai, but he was also helpless. A disciple said anxiously, "This Su Qiuo used some evil method to make Senior Marshal Brother Fu unconscious." Another disciple also said angrily, "This person dared to kill Senior Marshal Brother Dai. This is unforgivable." The first disciple cupped his hands at Guolai and said, "Su Qiuo must have a cure. Marshal Uncle Gua, why don't you ask Marshal Uncle Gua to come out and let fellow Taoist Zhang hand over Su Qiuo to us?" Gualai snorted and said, "With my temper, Su Qiuo should be killed to pay for Dai Huan's life. But just now, Brother Zhang saved the three of you and that Fu brat's life. That person was also captured by him, so how can I ask him to do that?" Senior Marshal Sister Wei sighed and said, "Marshal Uncle Gua, I think that fellow Taoist Zhang is a reasonable person. We won't ask him to do anything to Su Qiuo, just ask him to tell us a way to save Senior Marshal Brother Fu. I'm sure he won't refuse." Gualai's expression changed. He slapped his thigh and said, "That makes sense, but I don't know what Brother Zhang is planning, so it's not convenient for me to do anything. Marshal Niece Wei, you've always been smart, so I'll leave this matter to you." Senior Marshal Sister Wei hurriedly said, "Liawa should share the worries of fellow disciples and teachers." After Gualai gave her a few more instructions, she left the courtyard and went to the top floor of the treasure pavilion. She saw Zhang Pan standing guard at the door. She didn't have Dai Huan's superior temperament, and she came with a request, so she spoke in a rather humble manner. After Zhang Pan went in to report, he came out not long after and said, "Master, please come in." Senior Marshal Sister Wei thanked him and stepped inside. After passing through 3 courtyards, she arrived at an alchemy room. Seeing Zhang Yan sitting on a jade couch, she quickly bowed and said, "My daughter Wei Lihua greets fellow Taoist Yang." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, why have you come?" Wei Lihua sighed and said, "It's because Senior Marshal Brother Fu was hit by Su Qiuo's magic treasure and is still unconscious. I hope that fellow Taoist can ask Su Qiuo if he has a way to save him." Zhang Yan said, "I did ask about this, but Su Qiuo once said that the magic treasure can't be cured, so I'm afraid that I won't be able to get an answer." When Wei Lihua heard this, she couldn't help but look disappointed. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Wei, you don't have to worry. I'll find someone to investigate. Maybe there's a way to save him." He shouted, "Zhang Ju, come out." As soon as he said this, Mountain River Child came out and bowed. "Master, what are your orders?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You're experienced and knowledgeable. Go take a look at fellow Taoist Fu and see what exactly injured him." When Wei Lihua saw Zhang Ju appear out of thin air, she initially thought that this Zhang Yan had taken his servant away with a magic treasure, so she didn't think much of it. However, after taking a few looks, she was shocked and thought to herself, "This boy is a spirit. He doesn't have any flesh or blood, but he's like a living person. He's clearly a treasure spirit. Even big sects don't have many of such magic treasures, but this fellow Taoist Zhang can actually carry one around with him. He must have an extraordinary background. We've all underestimated him." Since he was a magic treasure spirit, she didn't dare to be careless. She hurriedly said, "Celestial Child, please come with me." Mountain River Child waved his hand and said, "No need." With a shake of his body, he disappeared without a trace. After waiting for a while, he returned to the room and reported, "Master, I already know why that person fell unconscious. His heart acupoint was blocked by something." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. A technique that could block the heart acupoint was obviously a technique of the devil path. He thought about Su Qiuo's background and understood. He said, "Can you see what it is?" Zhang Ju replied, "Master, this qi is called Peri-Li Godly Wind. It's made by collecting a drop of blood essence from the heart tips of 99 dragon seeds, and then extracting the soul essence of thousands of people, mixed with the tears of mermaids, the eyes of nobles, and the like. Once this qi is released, no matter how magic treasures or mystical techniques you use, you can't resist it. The only way to escape is to avoid it. Although this thing can melt under the scorching sun for half a day, once it touches your body, it will immediately block the acupoint of your heart and confuse your mind." When he said this, Wei Lihua covered her chest and exclaimed, "This thing is so powerful and evil. Is there a way to expel it?" Zhang Ju nodded and said, "Of course there is. In order to avoid the sun, this qi is curled up in the heart acupoint of this talisman Taoist. It can wait for 81 days. If this talisman Taoist has not lost his mind, he will wake up. Or we can ask a heavenly abode to help and use the true fire in his chest to circulate through the acupoint and force it out. Naturally, he will be saved." Wei Liua's beautiful face changed slightly. Even Tao Zhenhong was only a Yuanying Zhenren, so he could not save Fu Yuqing. Furthermore, this thing was so evil. If they really waited for so many days, who knew what would happen in the end? She could tell from Zhang Ju's words that it was extremely dangerous. When she thought of this, a trace of worry could not help but float up between her brows. At this moment, the two of them heard a shout from outside the sea boat. The people inside get out. What have you done to senior brother Su? Do you know that he is a disciple of Chongyue True Temple? Quickly let him out, don't make a mistake. Zhang Yan smiled to himself and said, the messenger is here. Chapter 191. Target equals, _blank, Hong'an Island, Qijin Palace. Friendly fight in the main hall, a man in white with his hair in a bun was sitting upright. He was looking at the letter in his hand with his eyebrows raised. His face was delicate and pale, but his nose was hooked and his eyes were bright. Even though he was thin and small, he still stood up straight. This person was the direct disciple of Chongyue Zhen Temple, Shinminggu. He snorted and threw the letter in his hand on the table. He sneered, this Su Qiuo's ability is not good enough. He asked someone to capture him, but he wants me to go and take care of this for him. How ridiculous. Sitting below him was a cultivator with short eyebrows and a big nose. He was his junior disciple, Shen Kong. He saw that Shinminggu seemed to be quite impatient and hurriedly said, after the elders of Su learned of this, they have come to ask about it. Senior disciple, please consider carefully. Shinminggu smiled disdainfully, this Zhang Yan challenged me. If I don't go, I'm afraid they will say that I didn't help and deliberately caused the death of my fellow disciple. Shen Song carefully asked, then senior disciple, are you going or not? Shinminggu lowered his head to look at the letter. A faint smile appeared on his lips as he said, I've met with the direct disciples of the Nanhua sect and the Tai Hao sect these days. They're only SOSO. I'll write a letter later. Send it to that Zhang Yan. I want to see what's so great about the disciples of the Yingcang sect. Shen Song consulted. Then, should I bring the 3,000 drops of Ren Kuei water essence that Zhang Yan asked for? Shinminggu waved his hand and said, yes. Su Qiuo is willing to pay, so I will bring it for him. Otherwise, Su clan will say that I have ulterior motives. Are you afraid that they can't pay? Shen Song thought for a while and said, I heard that this person and Tao Zhenren's disciples are now together. A few days ago, I caught that Shen Yan, senior disciple, is going now. I'm afraid it's a trap. Shen Minggu said indifferently, junior martial brother is worrying too much. The letter clearly states that they asked me to meet in front of Oxhorn Island. This island is the territory of my Chongyue Zhen Temple. Do you think I'm afraid of them playing some tricks? Shen Song thought carefully. He felt that as long as he was careful, there wouldn't be any accidents. However, at this time, a seal letter painted with a glaring scarlet color flew into the palace. It flew straight up to the palace. Shen Minggu, who originally had a calm expression, glanced at it, and his expression changed. He hurriedly reached out to grab it. He held the talisman in his hand. With a solemn expression, he tore it open. He took out the letter and opened it. His brows furrowed for a moment before relaxing. After reading it, his eyes lit up and he stood up abruptly. Heaven's will, heaven's will. It seems like I need to return to the sect as soon as possible. Shen Song was shocked. He stood up with a nervous expression and said, Senior martial brother. What exactly happened? This scarlet talisman letter was not an ordinary letter. It was an extremely urgent matter that would only be sent out by Chongyue Zhen Temple. With a shake of Shinminggu's hand, the letter shattered into pieces. He laughed heartily and said, Elder Su failed to forcefully break through. His 1,000 years of cultivation was destroyed in a day, and now he's dead. However, one of the 3 treasures of our sect, the murderous Shadow Blade, needs to be hosted by another 3rd-generation disciple. Heaven is really helping me. Without Su Qiuo, who else in the sect can compete with me? Hearing this, Shen Song's eyes also lit up. He became excited as he listened. After a while, he suddenly came to his senses and said in a small voice, "Senior Marshal Brother means, let Su Qiu go and don't bother with him?" Shen Minggu waved his hand and said, "No, wouldn't that give others an excuse? Not only do we have to go quickly." He suddenly thought of something and asked, "I heard that Zhang Yan and Tao Zhenhong's disciples are together?" Shen Song nodded and said, "Yes." Shen Minggu pointed at him and said, "Okay, you go personally. Not only do you have to bring the 3,000 drops of Renkue water essence, but also release Shen Yan. In short, we have to wash our hands clean of this matter and not let the Su family get hold of us." And he looked at Shen Song with a burning gaze and said, "When you go, you might as well hint to that Zhang Yan to detain Su Qiu for a few more days. Don't rush to release him, but don't leave behind any evidence." Shen Song nodded and glanced at Shen Minggu, who was in high spirits, and said in a muffled voice, "It's just that if Senior Marshal Brother doesn't go to the battle, this matter may affect your reputation. It will make others think that you are afraid of that Zhang Yan." Shen Minggu sneered and said, "Compared to the murderous Shadow Blade, this mere reputation is nothing. I'll find a chance to get it back in the future. Besides, the day Tao Zhenhong opens the sect is in the first month. When the time comes, if I have the help of the murderous Shadow Blade, why should I worry that I can't succeed? As for other matters, put them aside for now." Shen Song had always admired this Senior Marshal Brother of his. At this moment he said loudly, "Senior Marshal Brother, don't worry. You can go back to the sect and leave this matter to me." Shen Minggu looked at him and said in a deep voice, "Remember, speak less and be more humble. At this moment, don't create unnecessary trouble." Shen Song nodded heavily, then cupped his hands and said, "Senior Marshal Brother, I'll go arrange it now." Shen Minggu waved his hand and said, "Go." Shen Song left the main hall and went back to make some arrangements. He took Shen Yan out and put him in a human bag. Then he went to take out 3,000 drops of Renkue water essence. But after thinking for a while, he took out another 1,000 drops. After that, he left Hong, an island in a conveyance light, and went to Oxhorn Island at a moderate pace. The two islands were only 1,000 miles apart. In less than an hour he saw a large ship that was more than 4,000 feet long lying on the surface of the sea. There was a thin layer of flame covering the ship's body. In his heart he was also surprised. This was the first time he had seen such a huge ship. No wonder this Zhang Yan was so bold as to wait here. Even if it was surrounded, even a nascent soul-enlightened master might not be able to break through the restrictions on this ship in a short time. When he arrived at the front of the ship, he remembered Shen Minggu's instructions and didn't dare to be too presumptuous. He said loudly, "I'm Shen Song, a disciple of Chongyue True Temple. Under the order of my senior martial brother, Shen Minggu, I'm here to visit fellow Taoist Zhang." A clear voice came from the ship, "So it's fellow Taoist Shen. Please enter the treasure pavilion." As soon as the voice finished, the flame on the ship disappeared and the seal faded. When Shen Song saw this, he calmed himself down and flew towards the source of the voice. After entering the treasure pavilion, a man with a rough and dark face came forward and said angrily, "Honorable guest, please follow me this way." Shen Song frowned slightly and thought to himself, this Zhang Yan ship is really imposing. Tens of thousands of spirit shells are probably a small number. I can see that this fellow Taoist Zhang is also extremely wealthy. Maybe he's a disciple of an aristocratic family in Qinsong school. But why is the servant beside him so coarse? He followed Zhang Pan all the way to the inner courtyard. After a few turns along the corridor, he came to a side hall. There was a bamboo curtain in front of him. Zhang Pan stopped. He bowed and said loudly, "Master, I've brought that esteemed guest." After that, he lifted the bamboo curtain. He said, "Esteemed guest can enter by yourself." Shen Song took a step inside and saw that the inner room was empty. There were no other objects or furnishings. There was only a jade couch on the opposite side. A handsome young Taoist was sitting cross-legged. He first praised good looks in his heart and then went forward to greet him. "I'm Shen Kong, greetings to fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan's sharp gaze scanned him and then he said with a faint smile, why didn't fellow Taoist Shen Minggu come by yourself? Shen Tsong smiled apologetically. Senior apprentice brother Shen has important matters to attend to and can't leave right now. Please don't blame him. However, according to what you said in the letter, I've brought all the items needed to redeem senior apprentice brother Su. He reached into his sleeve and took out 3 palm-sized water pouches. He then sent them forward. Zhang Yan waved his hand and the 3 water pouches landed on the table. He picked one up and pulled out the cork to examine it. It was indeed the 9th Kuei water essence without a doubt. He was surprised. He didn't think that this water would be so easily obtained and that he even had the intention to fight with Shen Minggu. He didn't really understand the other's actions. However, his expression didn't change. He capped the bottle and slowly put it down. He said with a smile, fellow Taoist Shen must have a close relationship with fellow Taoist Su in the sect to be able to bring this item here so quickly? Shen Tsong's spirit rose. He raised his head and looked at Zhang Yan. Although the surnames Su and Shen are relatives, my senior apprentice brother Su and my senior apprentice brother Su don't have much contact. Zhang Yan's gaze flickered slightly. These words were equivalent to saying that Su Qiuo and Shen Minggu didn't have a close relationship. They might even have a bad relationship. Shen Tsong coughed and took out a human pouch from his sleeve. He opened it and revealed an unconscious young man. He cupped his hands and said, last time, because of a misunderstanding, my senior apprentice brother captured a fellow Taoist under Tao Jinren. I heard that fellow Taoist Zhang and Tao Jinren are on good terms. So my senior apprentice brother ordered me to bring this person as well. I only ask that you take good care of my senior apprentice brother Su and don't let him suffer any harm. A subtle expression appeared on Zhang Yan's face. What kind of person was he? How could he not understand the meaning behind Shen Tsong's words? If the other really wanted to redeem Su Qiuo, why would he say things like, take good care of him? He was clearly hinting to him to keep Su Qiuo here and not to let him go in a hurry. Although he didn't know the real reason behind it, he could guess that it must have something to do with Shen Minggu not being able to come here. Perhaps something important had happened in the sect, and the other party didn't want Su Qiuo to return to the sect at this time. He smiled to himself. This was also good. Su Qiuo killed Dai Huan, and he had no intention of letting him go. He still had the intention of fighting with Shen Minggu. Now that he had gotten what he wanted, the rest had nothing to do with him. He could just hand this person and Xin Yan over to Guolai and the others. It could also be considered as returning a favor. However, since the other party wasn't willing to take Su Qiuo back, he couldn't let them go so easily. So he pretended not to know and put on a sincere expression. He sighed and said, senior apprentice brother Shen is indeed a man of his word. If that's the case, fellow Taoist can wait here for a moment. I'll order someone to bring fellow Taoist Su here, and you can take him back. Shen Tsong's expression changed slightly. Could it be that this Zhang Yan didn't understand the meaning of his words? He was anxious and raised his head, but what he saw was Zhang Yan's meaningful gaze. He was startled at first, then suddenly understood and cursed. He took 2 steps forward, took out a jade bottle from his sleeve, and placed it on the table. Then he took 2 steps back. He didn't say what it was, but just stood there in silence. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed slightly. After a moment of silence, he smiled lightly and said, fellow Taoist Shen, I suddenly remembered that this fellow Taoist Su seemed to have killed a disciple of Tao Jinren. His fellow disciples are very sad and indignant. If I let fellow Taoist Su go, I'll definitely be stopped by them. I'm afraid I won't be able to return with you. However, I'm not a person who doesn't keep his promise. I'll keep these things for now. In the future, when fellow Taoist Shen Minggu is free, you can come to me to take them back. Shen Tsong couldn't help but curse again, but he let out a long sigh in his heart. He put on a regretful expression and sighed. Then the heavens really don't fulfill one's wish. No one expected this in advance. It seems that I can only report back to my senior apprentice brother and then make further plans. Chapter 192. Mysterious Spirit Island. Zhang Yan was cautious in his actions. When he was talking to Shin Song, he secretly ordered Zhang Pan to summon Wei Lihua. After she confirmed that the man in the sack was Xin Yan, she sent Shin Song, who was sweating profusely, out of the sea boat with a smile. After returning to his room, he carefully counted his gains and found that he had about 4,000 drops of Rinkue water essence in his hands. He was satisfied and thought to himself, I took advantage of Chongyuezhen Temple, but I didn't return them. Even if there's an inside story, the elders of Su Kuo's clan won't let this go. I can't go to Chongyuezhen Temple's flying boat Celestial Market. Why don't I go to Tao Jinren and release the two Taoists first before making other plans? As he was thinking, he heard Zhang Pan shout from outside the door, Master, Taoist Guo is here. Zhang Yan was planning to go find Guolai. Hearing this, he became spirited and stood up, saying, Quickly invite him in. Guolai walked in with large strides, shouting as he walked, Taoist Zhang, this is strange. What kind of trick are you playing? This Shen Minggu has never been willing to suffer losses. How did you get him to return them with a letter? If you say it's because of friendship, Old Gua, definitely don't believe it. Zhang Yan smiled but didn't talk about this matter. He only said, Taoist came at the right time. Now I have the intention to visit Tao Jinren and release the two Taoist seals on Lu and Jing. However, I don't know the way. Can Taoist help me? Guolai had just heard that Zhang Yan asked for Xin Yan back. This meant that he had made the right decision in asking Zhang Yan to help him in the first place. This would allow him to gain face in front of the younger generation. He was happy and didn't mind Zhang Yan changing the topic. He said, I came for this matter. My master lives on Mysterious Spirit Island. Without the guidance of a talisman, I'm afraid Taoist won't be able to find that place in your lifetime. Mysterious Spirit Island was made by Tao Jinhong using his qi to gather earth. This island floated on the sea. Other than Clear Feather sect disciples with talismans, outsiders couldn't enter. Guolai took out a talisman from his sleeve and flicked it towards Zhang Yan. He said, Brother Zhang, refine this item. Zhang Yan raised his hand and caught it. Holding it in his palm, he didn't hesitate and immediately injected a strand of qi into it. In a flash, a spell appeared on it. He took a closer look and knew that this was the key technique that focused on how to capture the aura and deduce the location of Xianling Island. He saw that the incantation was exquisite and couldn't be compared to ordinary incantations. Obviously, it was a secret technique passed down in the sect. He smiled and said, Dao friend, by giving me this incantation, aren't you afraid that I'll leak it out? Guolai laughed aloud and said, After the first month, our Pure Feather sect will establish our sect on the sea, a new sect apart from the 10 great sects of the Taoist sections. Do you think we'll be afraid that our sect will be coveted by others? If that's the case, why don't we disband earlier? Zhang Yan nodded. Although Guolai's words were arrogant, the world was unpredictable. Over the past 10,000 years, other than the 3 great profound sects of Yutsong, Shaoqing, and Yushao, the other great sects had been replaced from time to time. Who knew what the situation would be like after 1,000 years? The Donghua continent was about to face a calamity. Maybe Clear Feather's sect would be able to rise and dominate. After Guolai finished laughing, he looked at Zhang Yan and asked, Old brother, let me ask you one more thing. After removing the 2 fellow Taoist seals, where are you planning to go? Zhang Yan smiled and said, I came out of the sect to find the medicine to condense the pill. Now that I have the 4 Marquises' water, I will return to the Donghua continent to find another medicine after I refine the pill transformation water for you. Guolai waved his hand and said, Brother, I'm not in a hurry. My Clear Feather sect is about to open. Why don't you stay and watch the ceremony? Zhang Yan looked at Guolai and nodded with a smile. The opening of your sect is a joyous occasion. I will send you a congratulatory gift. Guolai laughed and said, Brother Zhang, don't feel bad. Just listen to me. You will be rewarded when the time comes. He was still injured and couldn't talk for long. After a few more words, he returned to his room. After he left, Zhang Yan thought that Guolai seemed to have something else in the end. However, there was no point in thinking about it now. He would know when he arrived at Xianling Island. Thinking of this, he cast aside his thoughts. made a hand seal, and carefully deduced the location of Xianling Island according to the talisman. He yelled and activated the talisman. The Chi-Dragon ship suddenly let out a roar, and the 36 dragon-climbing pillars rotated at the same time, stirring up huge waves and pushing the atmosphere away. The ship went straight to the southeast. The direction of Xianling Island where Tao Jinren was located was filled with storms and waves. If it was a normal boat, it would not be easy to reach this place. It would have to avoid the thunderclouds and storms according to the talisman's instructions to avoid getting caught up in it. However, the Dragon Country's boat was sturdy and did not need to worry about such things. Even if it plunged into a storm, it would not shake at all. Thus, the journey was smooth and stable. Zhang Yan pushed the speed of the Dragon Country's boat to the limit. In less than 10 days, he saw a black reef floating on the island. According to the talisman's instructions, this was where Xianling Island was. However, there was nothing else other than this black reef. He knew that there must be a barrier around this place. While he was inspecting it, Guolai had already flown out of the ship in a streak of light. When he was in midair, he stretched out a finger and a small hammer that shone with a dazzling golden light struck the reef twice and thrice, emitting a series of dong-dong sounds. As soon as he finished speaking, a white light soared into the sky. A short cultivator flew out from the reef and said loudly, "Which fellow disciple has returned?" Guolai shouted, "Brat, could it be that you don't recognize me? Hurry up and open the barrier." The short cultivator was shocked when he saw this. He quickly cupped his hands and said, "So it's Marshal Uncle Gua. Please wait for a moment." He did not dare to delay. He quickly took out a talisman and waved it at the opposite reef. The scenery in front of him rippled like water. Then, it suddenly separated and moved a corner of the illusion, revealing a door. Guolai pressed down the cloud and landed on the top of the treasure pavilion. He waved his hand and said, "Brother Zhang, just go inside." Zhang Yan nodded and drove the boat inside. After passing through the barrier, he felt his vision open and the world in front of him had changed. In the distance, there was a spirit mountain that was 100 zhang tall. There were ancient trees that reached the sky, clear springs and waterfalls. On the cliff, there were palace eaves, old vines and dragon branches climbing up the walls. There were 4 floating islands that surrounded the mountain, each occupying one side. There were arched golden bridges between them. From time to time, spirit apes would climb over and there were faint whistling sounds coming from the empty mountains and valleys. When Zhang Yan saw this scene, he was also amazed. He had seen many similar scenes in the sect, so it was not very rare. However, this Tao Jinren was only a 3rd-layer Yuanian cultivator, yet he could condense such a blessed land with his mana. He did not know if he had someone's help or if he had relied on some powerful magic treasure. Wei Lihua and the others also came out of the treasure pavilion and stood on the deck with Zhang Yan. Before the boat reached the shore, a streak of light passed by. As if it saw them, it turned in the air and landed. A black-skinned Taoist appeared. He looked left and right and said, "Marshal Nephew Wei, you've returned? Why don't I see my nephew?" Wei Lihua did not expect this person to suddenly appear and could not help but take a step back. She looked at the 2 people from the same sect behind him and took a deep breath. She said in a low voice, "Marshal Uncle Dai, Senior Marshal Brother Dai?" The middle-aged Taoist's expression changed. He took a step forward and said anxiously, "What happened to Dai Huan? Could it be that something happened to him?" Wei Lihua hesitated for a moment but still said, "Senior Marshal Brother Dai has been harmed." What? The beard on the middle-aged Taoist's chest moved even though there was no wind. His sharp gaze swept toward Zhang Yan who was behind them and shouted, "Who dares to harm my nephew? Is it this person?" His voice rumbled and reverberated throughout the valley. Guolai frowned and glared at him, saying, "Dai Daoren, what are you saying? If it wasn't for me, Brother Zhang, we might not have been able to catch the person who killed your nephew." Zhang Yan also knew that this person's heart was in a mess because of his nephew's death. He did not have the intention to target him, so he did not mind. However, looking at this person, he clearly had the cultivation of a minor Jindan. He thought to himself, looking at this person's surname and appearance, He is also not a disciple of Tao Jinren. I wonder where he came from. Wei Lihua did not dare to say more. She quickly opened the perfume pouch on her waist and took out the human sack. She untied the zipper and tipped it down. A person rolled out. Su Qiuo was stuffed into the human sack and was originally unconscious. However, he had a strong foundation after all. When the sun shone on him, he woke up with a quiver. He saw a middle-aged Taoist looking at him with a murderous expression. Wei Lihua pointed at him and said, "This person is the murderer who killed senior martial brother Dai." Su Qiuo saw the Taoist looking at him coldly and instantly felt that something was wrong. He hurriedly shouted, "Everyone, my father is Su Gongyuan. If you want to kill me, you better think carefully." Su Gongyuan? The middle-aged Taoist was shocked. He wanted to make a move but hesitated. He saw Guilai looking at him with a face full of mockery. He gritted his teeth and formed a spell with 2 fingers. With a clang, a magic sword flew out of its scabbard and slashed down. Su Qiuo turned pale with fright. He wanted to dodge, but his body was restrained by the talisman. He could not move at all. He could only watch as the flying sword fell. However, when the flying sword reached the tip of his nose, it stopped and did not fall. He was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. The middle-aged Taoist's fingers trembled and a struggling expression appeared on his face. In the end, he stomped his feet and shouted. He put the flying sword back into its scabbard. With red eyes, he shouted at Wei Lihua and the others, "Why is it not you who died, but my nephew died?" When he finished, he did not greet them. He turned into a wisp of smoke and flew towards one of the jade peaks on the island. Guilai said with a face full of disdain, "You don't have the guts to take revenge, but you blame others for not dying. You've really learned something new." Zhang Yan also shook his head and said, "Could it be that this person is not from the same sect as you?" Guilai spat and said with disdain, "This person is just a rogue cultivator. If it wasn't for my 4th martial brother, I would have already kicked him out." He seemed to feel that he had said too much. He coughed and said to Zhang Yan, "Brother Zhang, I'll go see my master now. Leave your matter to me. Don't worry." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist." Guilai then said to Wei Lihua, "Marshal niece Wei, bring my brother Zhang to choose a good cave to stay in." Wei Lihua hurriedly said, "Marshal uncle, don't worry. Marshal niece will arrange everything." Guilai nodded and flew away. Wei Lihua turned around and smiled sweetly at Zhang Yan, saying, "Fellow Taoist, please come with me. Thank you for taking care of me on the boat. Now, let me show you my hospitality." #target=_blank. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.